Good evening. Happy Wednesday. We will be continuing to read Miyuki Miyabi's The Book of Heroes. Um, Little recap of the events so far. The main character, whose name escapes me right now, probably should have looked at that. Yuriko. Her brother uh, stabbed a kid at school and then disappeared. Uh, Turns out he got a hold of a copy of a book that was The Yellow King, and that Yuriko now needs to go on a quest to rescue her brother and re-imprison the Yellow King. She is currently in the the land of no name, I believe is what it's called. Is where the hermits live, who are many but are also one. It's a group of multiple people that are all the same person. Uh, they are spinning the wheels of, I think it's penance. Um, and one wheel puts stories out into the world, and the other wheel brings stories back into the world. And if the Yellow King is not stopped, he can uh, take all the stories from the wheel that is uh, bringing stories back in for himself and stop the wheel that's putting out stories, which will cause the world to end and start anew. Uh, so Yuriko's trying to prevent the world from restarting. And last we left off, she had just learned about the wheels and how they worked. So we will start chapter 5. The hunt begins. Yuriko found herself once again standing on the small knob of a hill overlooking the plateau where the great Wields of Inculpation, that's the name, next to her stood the Archdevout, and the young nameless monk who had so recently become her servant. Dawn was beginning to break in the nameless land. Light crept warily over the eastern horizon as a wavy white line hovering in the distance. When departing and returning to this land, it is best you make the spot here your point of reference, the Archdevout counseled her. He had an air of dignified authority about him again. Gone was the momentary confusion she had seen in the dome of convocation. The magic glyph upon your forehead will work to take you to other places, but you will be safest if you keep close to the great wheels, the origin of all stories. You mean there's a chance I might get lost? Yes, though it is very slight, the Archdevout admitted with a faint smile. Not that you would be in any danger, but I fear much time might be lost were you to find yourself on an accidental visit to some far-flung region. The young devout had been silent, his mouth stuck in a crooked little frown. He was shining with sweat from the very top of his bald head down to the bridge of his nose, and seemed as stiff as a board. Whenever Yuriko happened to so much as glance in his direction, he would practically leap back and lower his head. Yuriko got tired just watching him. She decided to try to avoid looking at him at all. The Archdevout handed Yuriko some black robes, much like the ones the nameless devout themselves wore, and told her to put them on over her regular clothes. These are vestments of protection. They protect the all-caste and strengthen the workings of magic. They will be of much aid to you on your journey, I think. Yuriko put on the inky black robes. They smelled of dust. The hem of the robes was long, reaching down to the knobs of her ankles. The sleeves went all the way down to her fingertips. When she put on the hood, it nearly covered her face, making her entirely incognito and very suspicious looking. Before she began her search for the hero, the Archdevout explained, "You must first return home. You will look for clues. You must find what it was about the king in yellow that bewitched your brother so. So much that he swore allegiance to him. So much that he pressed his forehead to the floor. You must find out into which hole in your brother's heart the king in yellow crept. In order to do that," the Archdevout explained, "you would have to discover exactly what Hiroki had been doing before the incident and his disappearance. You must find out what thoughts crystallized in your brother's heart in those days. They will be the clues that guide you toward him. In other words, you needed a motive." But how am I going to find that out? Who could she ask? Who could tell her? Her father? Her mother? One of Hiroki's teachers at school? The Archdevout nodded. "When you return to the circle, the correct path will open before you. The books in the reading room will aid you of their own accord. Do not despair. Your allies are many." "Hey, Casey." "Too late, already said hi." His voice was full of confidence. As though to drive all doubt from her mind, Yuriko found her mouth mimicking the servant's frown. Oh, she realized. He's not unhappy. He's just tense. "Do not forget. You are not the same person you were before you visited our land. From now until the moment your role in the story is complete, you will not be the 11-year-old girl Yuriko Murasaki. You are the all-cast. You are not bound by considerations of age, gender, or your former position in society. Thus, I think it well that you choose a new name, a name befitting your new status." Yuriko brightened. Choosing a name sounds like fun. I can pick something cool like... The Archdevout interrupted her rising enthusiasm. "The soul resides in the name. You must not choose something too different from your original name, or you risk alienating the 11-year-old soul you have carried with you thus far." Suddenly, it didn't sound as fun. Yuriko, Yuriko, Yuriko," the Archdevout muttered thoughtfully. "How about Yuri?" "That's not so bad. It sounds like my old nickname. Yuriko, now Yuri." Turned to the young devout. "I think you need a name too. I can't just call you servant all the time." The young devout hesitated, glancing towards the Archdevout. The Archdevout sighed. "The nameless devout must not be named while they set foot in this land," he explained. "You may name him once you have returned to the circle. No, you must name him, for he is not permitted to name himself." Yuri agreed she would. An early morning breeze blew across the top of the hill. The hem of her robes fluttered. Some distance below them, the great wheels turned. "So I should go, shouldn't I? No point in staying here, really." Yuri felt suddenly afraid. Her heart beat rapidly in her chest. How do I do this again? Something about touching the glyph on her forehead. "Take your servant's hand," the Archdevout instructed her, lowering his head reverently, "so that he may pass with you into the circle." Yuri glanced over at the young devout. He appeared to be drenched in sweat again. "Your hand," Yuri said, offering her right hand to the boy. With jerky movements, the young devout reached out his right hand too, then hastily exchanged it for his left, which he then withdrew as well to wipe it on his black cloth of his robes over and over. Yuri smiled. "It's okay, I'm sweaty too." He grinned and took his hand. It was dry as a bone, softer and warmer than she had expected. Yuri placed her left hand on her forehead and closed her eyes. He spoke clearly, carefully, enunciating each word. "Take us back to Ichiro Minochi's reading room." The magic circle on her forehead shone with the cold light of the moon, instantly illuminating her face. Then Yuri and her new servant vanished, leaving the Archdevout standing by himself. For a while, the Archdevout stood there silently in the dim light of the dawn. Tiny droplets of morning dew on the grass caught the brightening rays of the sun and began to sparkle like fragments of stars scattered across the ground. As they left, the torches around the turning wheels below burned down to stumps and flickered out one by one. The archdevout looked up. His aged body shimmered and then reshaped itself into the familiar appearance of the other nameless devout, the youthful monk Yuri had met first upon her arrival. Without a sound, he began to walk down the hill. It happened just as it had when she first came to the nameless land. Yuri opened her eyes, and she was back in the reading room in her great-uncle's cottage, surrounded by stacks of books. She was standing in the center of the large magic circle she had drawn on the floor. "You're back!" It was Aju. Yuri's heart leapt with joy. Even though she hadn't known the book for more than a few days, he already felt like an old friend. "Aju! Aju, where are you?" "Right here." A red light blinked furiously from the corner of one of the stacks of books up against the wall. The book looked like he was practically jumping to get her attention. "Aju!" Yuriko ran over and hugged the red book to her chest. "I was there, Aju. I went to the Nameless Land. Even went inside the Hall of All Books. And... Yuri's throat burned and her voice choked with a sob of relief. "I saw the great wheels. I heard them turning, and their song. And the Nameless Devout were there, pushing them, pushing." Tears flowed from her cheeks, though she couldn't say whether they were of relief or sadness. Yuri passed her face to Aju's cover and cried. We know what it's like over there. All of us," Aju said gently. There was a warmth to his red glow. "I see you're wearing vestments of protection." Yuri looked up, wiping her face with one sleeve. "Yes, Archdevout said they were special." "They are. They hold a very powerful magic. They'll protect you from danger, little miss. So you probably shouldn't blow your nose on them." Yuri, who was indeed about to blow her nose, laughed out loud. "I have a new name, Aju." "Yes, as an all caste. What are you called?" "Yuri." "A good name. It has a nice ring to it." Aju glowed once brightly, making Yuri squint against the light. "And you have a servant, I see. Want to introduce him to us?" The young devout was still crouched in the middle of the magic circle, perfectly still, though his eyes flashed like those of a captured beast. When Aju mentioned him, he jumped like a frightened rabbit, scurried over to the door of the reading room, and knelt there, pressing his hands and face to the floor, and stammered, "Forgive me, I am the Lady Yuri's servant." His voice was shaking and squeaky. He was sweating again, too. It was morning in this world. The early sun came in through the window, making his head glisten brightly. You don't have to be scared," Yuri said, turning to him. "These books here are my friends, just like the Archdevout said." "That's right," Aju agreed. "Stand and greet us. If you insist on carrying every time you meet someone, you'll only be a bother to your master." Boy Devout managed to look up and immediately began to apologize. Still holding Aju in her arms, Yuri found a place for the two of them to sit among the pile of books. "Here, sit down. Let's catch our breath for a moment." Yuri sat on the stepladder she had used before. For the younger devout, she motioned toward a small stool hiding between two of the teetering stacks of books. He went over and sat down with a wary look at the stool, as though it might bite him. "So you have brought back a servant," said another familiar voice. Yuri turned around, looking for the sage. "Is that you, Sage? We're back," Yuri announced herself. There was no response. Even though the reading room was gradually brightening, the morning light did not completely drown out the paler light of the books. Except now the room looked less like a planetarium, and more like a hidden cave filled with glittering jewels. "Where is the sage?" Yuri asked, standing. Eventually, she heard him speak from directly ahead of her, high up on one of the shelves. "Lady Yuri, what will you name your servant?" His voice sounded very somber to her. Not that he was ever light-hearted and easygoing as Aju was, but Yuri thought she detected something else in his voice. He sounded displeased. The young devout seemed to have noticed it too, for he ducked his head again and drew his legs up onto the stool. I'm still thinking about that, Yuri replied, her own voice growing more serious. Is something wrong? Was I not supposed to bring him back? The Archdevout hadn't said anything like that. He said the Hollow Book had chosen the young devout. He had to bring him back. He didn't have any choice. Yuri explained all this, wondering what could be bothering the sage. Again, there was no answer. The sage's deep green light winked slowly, as though he were deep in thought. Are you angry? Yuri stood and began to move the stepladder over toward the wall. She thought it might help if she could pick the sage up and talk to him directly. I'm not angry. Please be seated, Lady Yuri. She noticed that the sage was even more polite than he had been before. It was almost embarrassing to have everyone call her lady. I'm not angry. It is only that the Nameless Devout are, as a rule, never to leave the Nameless Land. That one would break away and join you as her servant indicates most unusual circumstances. Circumstances of which I believe you have not yet been informed. The young devout bowed his head even deeper. The collar of his robe shifted, revealing part of one emaciated shoulder. Circumstances? From Yuri's lap, Aju spoke. If it was decided in the Nameless Land that he should go with her, then I don't see what the problem is. Silence, Aju, the female voice said. You're still young. There's much you do not understand. Yuri looked at Aju. She sensed that he returned her gaze, and would have if he were human. Tell us, then, the sage inquired of the young devout. Why is it that you have come here with the Lady Yuri? Yuri felt as though the weight of every book in the room had become a heavy silence, pressing down on her head. She heard a sound. The young devout's teeth were chattering. Yuri immediately felt sorry for him. Why is the sage being so harsh? It felt like she was looking at herself a few days before. She remembered how frightened she had been, how sad, as she had curled up in a ball and clenched her fists and trembled. I was... The young devout's throat was dry, his voice constricted. I have lost the right to be one of the Nameless Devout. Yuri's eyes opened wide. Nobody told me anything like that. What do you mean? She asked, before she could think better of it. The Nameless Devout flinched back as though he had been pricked by a needle. Yuri's words seemed almost physically painful to him. I'm sorry, it's okay. Don't be frightened. I'm not angry, it's just... I'm starting to feel like there are a great many things the Archdevout didn't tell me. I'm starting to wonder what's going on. Aren't you all? She asked the books around them, but there was no response. I feel the same way you do, Yuri, she offered at last. And I'm not sure why everyone seems so put out. Yuri sensing him glaring at the sage. Let's hear what the boy has to say and make our judgments after that. That boy is an apostate, the sage said curtly. He has admitted as much himself. Yeah, but the Archdevout chose him. Same thing with Yuri. There are no ranks among the Nameless Devout. Thus, there can be no orders given from one to another. This one who called himself the Archdevout was merely identifying as such for the benefit of Lady Yuri. He has no authority to choose nor recognize anyone. This silenced even Aju. He and Yuri exchanged glances again. It's strange for an all-caste to have a servant? Yuri asked the sage. Is this unusual? Is that why you don't like it? Didn't you tell me yourself that the Nameless Devout would help me? The sage hummed thoughtfully for a moment before replying. I did not mean they would aid you in this particular way. Since they have, there must be a reason for it, Lady Yuri. Now they are getting somewhere. So let's hear what the reason is. Then we'll know, right? And I really think you're scaring him. I really don't want you threatening my servant. Yuri hadn't intended it. Her voice seemed to have gained an air of authority. The sage's green light grew duller. I have spoken out of place, and I apologize, the sage said gravely. Let us do as the Lady Yuri advises. Yuri blinked. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go against you. Now I've done it. Yuri wondered what a grown-up would do in this situation. Maybe cough or something to change the mood? He tried coughing. It didn't seem to have much of an effect. Right, well, look. Yuri turned back to the young devout. You just said something that I hadn't heard before that sounded very important. Could you tell me more? Why were you no longer able to be a nameless devout? Yuri watched the young devout, who seemed completely unable to stop shivering, and remembered something she had heard in the Nameless Land. Weren't the nameless devout supposed to be sinners of some kind? Wouldn't it be a good thing to lose your qualifications to be one then? If you ceased to be a nameless devout, weren't you free of sin? The young devout looked up at her. He blinked and opened his mouth, as though he meant to say something but couldn't figure out exactly what. The weighty voice of the sage cut in again. I would inform the Lady Yuri that nameless devout can never truly be freed. Once a soul has become a nameless devout, they will never be anything but. For this one here, if a nameless devout loses his right to be a nameless devout, then he becomes nothing. He is nothing, the sage practically shouted. Yuriko jerked back. Her tongue curled up in her mouth. He's scary when he's mad. Miss Kyuchi at school could be scary sometimes, but it's nothing like this. If you will permit me, the young devout began. Go on, Yuri urged. Permit what? He was about to go over and hold his hand again, and looked like he needed it. If you will permit me, Lady Yuri, I will tell you why I was cast out of the Nameless Land. Cast out? You can have all the permission you want. But what's this about you being cast out? You weren't cast out. He was chosen to follow me, wasn't he? The young devout shook his head. He was trembling again, and his teeth were chattering loudly. No, Lady Yuri, I was cast out. For the chosen by the hollow book is to become an outcast. Well, nobody ever told me that. The young devout slumped, clutching at the collar of his black robes with tight fingers. He looked like a little lost child. Remember when the archdevout told you to take me with you? Yes? Didn't it seem like he was in a hurry? Could you not hear the harshness in his tone? In truth, she had. The archdevout had sounded very displeased with her new servant, just as the sage had a moment ago. He was in a hurry because he had very little time to remove me from the Nameless Land, where I had been defiled. You were defiled? Why? Because the book chose you? The young devout bowed deeply. Yes, but you have the order reversed. The hollow book chose me because I had been defiled. Then how are you defiled? The young devout clutched at his collar and swallowed dryly a couple of times. In the Nameless Land, the first bell is rung to mark the escape of the hero. The only other time that bell is rung is when the hero is imprisoned. If the bell rings differently on each occasion, so that any who hear it might know immediately what it means. So you heard it when the hero broke out of its prison. Had you heard the bell ring before? The young devout nodded. His teeth had stopped chattering. Yes, when the hero was bound. I cannot say how long ago it was because there is no time in the Nameless Land. But I can say that when the hero escaped, that was the first time I had ever heard the bell ring in that way. I knew immediately what had happened. The hero was free. The young devout closed his eyes. And the knowledge of that moved me, he said, shuddering as though he were deeply mortified by the admission. Around him, it seemed as though the books were holding their breath. The hero had escaped into the circle. At the moment I knew that, I felt something in my heart, a heart I should not possess. Yuri didn't know what to say to that. I knew there would be war, the young devout continued. A hunt would begin to chase down the hero, bring it back to the Nameless Land. That is what the ringing of the first bell told me. That is what moved me. Yuri breathed out slowly. Pardon me if I'm getting this wrong. Are you saying that you heard something big was going on, so you got excited? The young devout shrank back again, rooted to the spot. He was hugging himself with both arms. Yes, he replied in a tiny voice. Yes, that is what happened. Excited? So that's what you call it, the sage said. Yuri thought she detected a hint of sarcasm in the sage's harsh voice. He admits that the escape of the hero brought change to that changeless land, and his heart leapt, his soul stirred. He knew joy. Something else had crept into the sage's voice as he spoke. Fear. The sage was afraid. He was frightened by what Yuri's servant had said. What's going on here? The sage is just as frightened as the archdevout was when he opened the casket, took out the hollow book. A heavy silence descended upon the room. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the young devout. He seemed ready to cry or scream. Aren't you being a little hard on him? Yuri turned to the sage, trying to hide her own surprise at all this. I think I understand what he's saying. If I were forced to live in a place like that, doing the same thing over and over, I'd be happy about a little change myself. She pictured the devout at their endless task, day after day, pushing those giant wheels. The only thing even slightly unpredictable in that world was the movement of the sparks that rose from their torches. But, Lady Yuri, the nameless devout exists solely to push the great wheels of inculpation. Why? Because they are sinners? Because they try to live a story? Once again, the books in the reading room held their breath. Only Audrey seemed unperturbed. Look, what I don't get is, if they committed a sin or are being punished, why doesn't the punishment ever end? Why, when my servant's heart leapt, it was a sign that he had already paid off his debt. Maybe when my servant's heart leapt, it was a sign they had already paid off his debt and was ready to become a human again. Nobody said a word. The young devout looked up, but before he could speak, Audrey whispered to her. It was glowing very dimly. Sorry, Yuri, but I don't think that's right. That's not like what I know about the nameless devout. Their labors are never supposed to end. So they're never forgiven? Ever? There's no ever in a place without time. Yuri pouted, sticking out her lip. Just too cruel. How could that possibly be fair? It is true. Our sins are never forgiven, Lady Yuri, the young devout said softly. Well, if you insist, then fine. We'll never be forgiven. I just don't think that's right, Yuri shook her head. So what happened then? What happened after your heart jumped? I waited. Waited for what? For the first time, the young devout smiled. It was such a faint smile that, for a moment, Yuriko didn't trust her eyes. For you. Had a boy said the same to her a week ago, she would have blushed bright red, but with her new name, wrapped in the vestments of a nameless place, it seemed entirely appropriate. She understood how he had waited, full of hope and fear. Yuri lifted an eyebrow at the young devout. You were the one who put the blankets on me when I was sleeping in the Hall of All Books, weren't you? You lit the lamp in my room. The young devout blanched. Gotcha. So you were watching me. He had been waiting for the Allcast to arrive. When she did, he had watched her. Not like a policeman tailing someone, or a stalker. Just hadn't been able to keep his eyes off of her. So you were there the whole time, till the archdevout called you out of the shadows in the dome. The archdevout nodded slightly. My brothers realized this, thus knew that I had been defiled. So things like curiosity and wanting change are considered defilements in the Nameless Land? Pages are stuck together. Okay, there we go. It happens only rarely, said a voice. It was the sage. He spoke only with great difficulty, forcing the words out. You might call it an accident. A tinge of fear in his voice grew stronger. An accident, Yuri echoed. That reminds me. When the archdevout first pulled the hollow book from its container, he was surprised at how damaged it was. You said the nameless devout aren't human and don't have hearts, but I don't think that's true. They can be surprised and frightened and even a little angry, just like you can. The sage was quiet. His green light winked slowly, at great intervals, as though he were taking deep breaths. The archdevout was so surprised at seeing the book damaged Must not happen very often. Could that be connected to what happened with my servant? If both are such rare things, I'll bet it's not a coincidence. Is that what the Archdevout told you? The sage asked quietly. He said that the book had been damaged? Is that how he explained his dismay when he retrieved the hollow book from the casket in the Nameless Land, Lady Yuri? Oh, yes. The sage fell silent once again. The green glow began to flicker more rapidly, like a sprinter's heartbeat, and slowed again to the pace of a meditating monk. Sorry, the word was hyphened with a wraparound at the off. And slowed again to the pace of a meditating monk. I find it hard to believe that the book was damaged, the sage said at last. If the Archdevout said it, it must be so. He's choosing his words pretty carefully. And I think that the hero's violent escape from its prison somehow connected to the birth of your servant, as you say, Lady Yuri. Okay, kind of a roundabout way of agreeing with me, but okay. Have you never met an outcast with a servant? This is my first. Though I did know of the possibility. So it's not the first time ever? It is not. And it's not a good thing? There is a pause. It is not. Which is why he scolded me when I showed up with him. I was not scolding you, the sage hastily clarified. My words sounded harsh, then I must apologize. Yuri smiled. It's okay. I was just surprised. I'm not upset. And the book being damaged sounds pretty bad. But I don't see what's wrong about me having help. And think of him. She looked at the young devout. If I hadn't taken him out of that dismal place, he would have been stuck there forever. That has to be a good thing. Yuri turned to face the young devout. The hollow book chose you to help me. What could be bad about that? Yuri was practically shouting, happy with her own idea. I'll bet the book figured the Allcast would need some help after it saw how violently the hero broke free of its prison. That's why I chose you. If he helps me fight the hero and rescue my brother, so much the better. Think about it. You'll be freed, I'm sure of it. The book was giving him a second chance. Yuri felt a warm strength swell inside her. She stepped closer to the young devout and took his hand in hers. So stand straight and keep your chin up. You're here to help me after all. You're here to help yourself. Okay. Excuse me. It was Aju. I hate to interrupt this heartwarming scene you've got going here, but I'd like you to try something for me. What's that? Take off your robes. Yuri shrugged and took them off. He staggered. The strength went out of her knees. Her whole body felt heavy. The room began to spin around her. It felt like the stacks of books were going to collapse in on her in an avalanche of paper and leather bindings. She fell to the ground, unable to stand, elbows hitting the floor. She lacked even the strength to yelp. What's wrong with me? In the silent room, Yuri's stomach growled. You're starving, that's what, Aju said with a laugh. And you're completely exhausted to boot. Oh, really? Yuri lifted her head and looked in the direction of Aju's voice. Then she panicked. The young devout was gone. He was right there just a second ago. He was holding my hand. Where is he? Servant, she called. Where are you? Where'd you go? Now, don't worry, Aju said, winking at her with a burst of light. Put the vestments on again. It's 10 times harder putting them on than it had been to take them off. The instant the dusty black cloth fell over her shoulders, her strength returned. Her belly no longer felt empty, and the room stopped spinning. The young devout was right there, standing as he had been when they were holding hands a moment before, except his eyes were wide open. Lady Yuri? Hurriedly, he went to help her to her feet. Yuri jumped up. I'm okay, I'm fine. She spread the sleeves of her robes and looked at them. I get it. So that's what they do. That's what they do. And more, Aju said brightly. The vestments of protection have several features I'm sure you'll find handy. Best remember them. Aju made a sound like he was clearing his throat. 1. As long as you wear the vestments, you will feel no hunger or fatigue. 2. Inside the vestments, you will be invisible to anyone in this world. You mean like the Invisible Man? No, you would still be... Aju began before realizing what she meant. Yes, that's the name of the story, isn't it? Yeah, something like that. Still, though, you will be invisible. Anything you touch or move with your hands will be visible to people, so be careful. If you want to make something else invisible, though, all you need to do is slip it beneath your robes. Oh, and it will be incorporeal inside the robes, too. Which means no one will be able to touch you or know you're there in any way. Finally, Aju explained, when she took the vestments off, she would not be able to see her servant. So that's what happened. The young devout's head bobbed. Yes, yes. You disappeared from my sight too, Lady Yuri. There was only a space where you stood a moment before. I tried to reach out to you, but felt nothing. That's because the nameless devout have no real form outside of the nameless land, right? Aju said, directing his question towards the sage. That is correct, the sage confirmed, a lingering harshness to his voice. The magic of the vestments works through Yuri, to give her servant shape. His existence in this world is a borrowed one. Without the magic of the robes, they will not be able to see each other. Should they be drawn too far apart, they may never find each other again. Yuri swallowed. What would happen to the nameless devout if they got separated? Would he wander through the world, unable to leave, invisible to everyone? He will return to nothing, for he is nothing, the sage said, answering her unasked question. And I'll have to be careful, Yuri muttered. She wrote a note as big as she could on her mind, sticking it where she could see it. Oh, and one other thing, Aju added, a hint of laughter in his voice. The power of the vestments has given you the ability to use all kinds of magic spells. That is, it should have. Should have? Well, let me ask you then. Do you feel like you can do magic? Not at all. Yuriko tried to focus her thoughts into something, but nothing came. She didn't have an idea of where to begin. As I thought, it's because you lack knowledge. You don't know the spells. Lucky for you, Aju continued. There are a lot of spells in the books right here. Each one of us has our own specialty. Which brings me to another question. Remember what kind of book I am, by any chance? You're a dictionary. A beginner's dictionary of spells. Very good, Aju cheered. He was in a fine mood. Just use me and you'll be able to learn all sorts of spells. If you make the proper preparations, that is. What sort of preparations? Well, Aju said, there's a limit to my knowledge. I won't be enough to cover all you'll need on your upcoming journey, for sure. That's why you'll want me to be able to communicate with my friends here in the reading room, no matter where I am. That would be nice, eh? Then you'd just have to consult me to learn anything contained in any of the books in this room. All you need to do, Aju told her, is cast a spell of linking on him. So, what's the spell of linking? Where do I find it? That's one of the higher level spells, Aju said with a wink. I'll bet the sage knows it. Yuri looked up. The sage's green glow strengthened, then faded, as though he were about to say something, then thought better of it. If the Lady Yuri wishes it, I will teach it to her, he said at last. Thanks. Grab something to write with, the young devout suggested, dashing out of the room. I won't need anything, Yuri tried calling him back, but he didn't seem to notice. It's okay, let him go. He probably won't like this part anyway. Won't like it? Why? You are a bit slow, aren't you, Yuri? Aju said in a sing-song voice. Remember what I said about me being able to communicate with my friends no matter where I was? Aju, Yuri said, putting her hand to her mouth. You mean you'll come with me? You bet I will. Then Aju really did break into song. A song about traveling with Yuri and his upcoming adventures with the Allcast. Should I carry you in my backpack again? Yuri asked, suddenly wondering where she had left her backpack. Nope, not this time. Why not? Because there's a better way. You can turn me into something more convenient, something smaller, something that can move by itself. Like what? I've got just a spell. Take a look, he said, not answering her question. His pages began to flip before Yuri's eyes. Right here, that's the page. Now, Aju instructed, hold me up to the page with both hands. Hold me open to the page with both hands. Move your feet apart a little. That's right. You'll want to be steady. Now recite after me. Yuri took a breath and began to repeat the words after Aju said them. Quesaran, Pasaran, Ultimidete. Uga, Uga, Uga Chakaraka, Modestan. What a ridiculous spell, Yuri laughed out loud. In her hands, a bright red light suffused the book. For a moment, it glowed so brightly Yuri was afraid he had caught fire. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, a red sphere about the size of a soccer ball was floating before her, bouncing up and down like a balloon in the hands of a happy child. She extended a finger and gingerly touched it. The red sphere wobbled gently in the air. Hurry, let me out! It's Audrey's voice, coming from inside the sphere. Break it and let me out! Flustered, she grabbed the red sphere in both hands. It was like grabbing a giant blob of jello. In fact, it even looked like jello. I wonder if it tastes like raspberry, Yuri thought as she gave it a good squeeze. Her fingers sank into the blob. The sphere warped, then popped loudly. Aye! Something small came flying out of the sphere. It zipped up through the air like a spinning firecracker and zigzagged about the room before returning to land on top of Yuri's head. It felt soft against her hair, warm. She raised a hand to touch it. A long tail dangled down in front of her, hitting her on the nose. Achu, what are you? Something small was creeping through her hair. She could feel tiny feet, with even tinier toes. Whatever it was, it had 4 legs. Aju? Frankly, I was hoping for something a little, well, cooler. Aju's voice. He sounded crestfallen. Oh well, I should have known. The vestments of protection might be strong, but you're still pretty young. Yuriko felt around gingerly with her hand until she found the little thing's neck, and she picked it up between her fingers and brought it in front of her face. Yeah! Two little eyes blinked at her above a twitching pink nose. Disproportionately long whiskers tickled Yuri's cheek. Achu, you're a field mouse, Yuri said, startled, and the tickle of the whiskers made her sneeze. Hey, watch it! Aju shrieked, covering his eyes with 2 tiny paws. It is not the Lady Yuri's fault. You are but a small collection of knowledge, and this size suits you, the sage commented, and all the other books blinked with laughter. Yuri smiled. It was good to feel the mood brighten around her. Everything had been doom and gloom for too long. Well, Aju, I think you're pretty cute. Yuri smiled and pressed her nose to Aju's tiny pink nose. It's nice to meet you again. Yuri looked down at her vestments. They were older than they had seemed at first, and showed signs of having been mended several times. In one place, the inner lining had a large tear in it that someone had patched with a square of cloth. But the thread at the top side of the patch had come undone, making a perfect pocket for Aju to slip into. Inside the pocket, it was right over her heart, and when he stuck his nose out, he could look around from the split in her front collar. That's comfy, Aju squeaked, sounding pleased with this arrangement despite his earlier protests. By the time the young devout had returned from his search of the cottage, an old marker in hand, Yuri had already finished casting the spell of linking on Aju. Sorry, we don't need that anymore, Aju told him. Young Devout's eyes opened wide like he'd seen a ghost, or rather, a talking mouse, and everyone laughed. Thanks, Yuri said. Maybe I can use it for something else. You know, Yuri did tell me she didn't need that, but you didn't hear her. Pay more attention next time, Aju scolded. There's no need to be short with him, Aju, Yuri said, examining the marker. It looked ancient. Tried scribbling something with it, but no ink came out. It must have all dried up, even though the cap was on tight. Yuri frowned. You didn't find anything else that looked like you could write? Nothing at all. The young devout shook his head. That was odd. She knew her great-uncle had lived alone, but it seemed strange for there to be only one pen in the entire cottage. Pens and pencils were sort of a thing that collected when you weren't looking, until you had a whole pile of them, weren't they? That, and she knew Mr. Minochi had been a collector of books, which meant he did research. It means he must have taken notes. Unless he did everything on a computer. But then he still would have needed a pen or pencil to jot down memos and the like. What is it, Yuri? Let's get going, Aju said. He tickled the bottom of her chin with his long whiskers till she feared she might fall to the floor, giggling uncontrollably. All right. That is, where are we going, anyway? Your house, of course. We'll need to go searching for clues eventually. But first, let's see how your double is doing. You want to see her parents, don't you, Yuri? It's been a while. Yeah. She wondered what it'd be like meeting her parents now that she was an all-caste. She wondered if she could get used to it. Yuri walked into the center of the magic circle on the floor. You come too, she said to the servant. I think we have to hold hands again. The young devout stepped toward her, but hesitated at the edge of the magic circle. Where exactly will you go to, Yuri? Aju asked from her pocket. Teleportation. So you can be really specific. My room, maybe. No, my mom might be in there. Even if she can't see me in these robes. I'd be able to see her and I might freak out. I think the road outside in front of the apartment building. We can cross the street and go in through the front door. Are you sure that's a good idea? Aju asked. You remember exactly how wide the road is? Teleportation business is more difficult than you might think. Maybe somewhere inside the house would be safer for the first try. Nah, we'll be fine. Let's go. Yuri put one hand to her forehead. The young devout took her hand and swallowed nervously. Take us to the road in front of my house, next to the electrical pole with the sign for the Onoda Clinic on it. Then Yuri and the devout and the lone mouse Aju disappeared, leaving and blinking and winking books behind. Sage, said a quiet voice, seemingly as old as the sage himself. Are you sure about this? The sage winked once, slowly, before answering. I am. And besides, don't have much of a choice about it now. The winking of the books in the reading room stopped briefly, as if they were all taking a moment to silently pray. Then there's a little stopping point in the book, so I'm going to take a sip of my drink. You know, it is nice, because I have the book in front of me, and it has, basically a bunch of the plot points on it. And so now I actually have context for why there's a mouse on the cover. Okay, back into the story. The teleportation was different. Maybe because she was traveling through the real world this time. Yuri felt a sense of emotion, and she knew it when she had landed. She bent her knees and crouched, as though she had just hopped down from some higher place. Across the road stood a familiar gray building, Angel Castle Ishijima, home. Her eyes went up to the 5th floor. Wait a minute. The building looks closer than it should be. Yuri, look out! With a tremendous rumbling noise, a giant truck, its bed piled to overflowing with steel girders, came thundering down on them. And it passed right through them. Stunned, Yuri watched the back of the truck race away. The exhaust swirled through the air around them. We're in the middle of the street, Aju cried. Not that Yuri needed him to tell her that. The electrical pole she had been aiming for was to her back. There was a sign for the clinic on it. I told you, it's hard to get the distances just right at first. What's the matter? It's not like the cars can hit us. The young devout got his footing and spread his arms wide. Blinking, he looked down to make sure he hadn't been crushed. And he looked up, and his eyes opened wide. His jaws went slack, and he gasped. What is it? Yuri looked up. Dawn had broken and it was already well into morning. The spring sky was blue, the few puffy clouds bobbing peacefully along like drifts. Sorry, I am reading ahead of myself. Peacefully along like bits of dandelion fluff. What are you looking at? Archdevout didn't answer. So Yuri reached out and touched his arm. He still didn't look at her. She gave him a gentle shake. He stood there still, looking into the sky. What is that, Lady Yuri? What do you mean? It's the sky. What's so strange about that? The sky, the young devout muttered. No, it is surely the heavens. Why is it such a blue color? Yuri blinked. Don't they have a sky in the Nameless Land? Oh, that's right. It's always cloudy there, and covered in mist. You've never seen a blue sky before, have you? Eyes still wide, he looked at Yuri. Then he jabbed a finger above her head. What do you mean, sky? Is there a blue sky up there? All I see are the heavens, Lady Yuri. Yuri finally realized what the problem was. He must not use the word sky in the Nameless Land. Now that she thought about it, she realized that the pillar in the center of one of the great wheels and the clouds over her head had both been called heaven. Here we call the heaven sky, she told him. It's a blue sky, she pointed upwards. It's so beautiful, the young devout breathed, enchanted by the scene above him. Its blue reflected in his eyes. Of course, they were in the middle of the city, full of trucks and cars going this way and that. That's not a real blue sky, Yuri thought, frowning at the brownish haze that clung to the horizon. It reminded her of something her brother had said once. There is a sky color they call azure blue. In more difficult books than the ones she had read, it was the kind of deep, rich blue she and her brother would never see in their city. Maybe not even in their country. There's probably only a few places in the world left where you could see a real azure blue sky. Still, the sky here seemed to be more than enough for her servant. Even standing here in the exhaust from the big trucks, the smoggy sky was enough to impress someone who had been trapped for so long in the Nameless Land. I've got it, Yuri said suddenly. Sky! What's that, Aju asked? The nameless devout was still too busy staring up, the springtime sun in his face, to notice. His eyes were closed, and he had begun to gently sway back and forth. That's your name now, servant. The young devout blinked and looked at her. What? Did you say something, Lady Yuri? Yes, your name will be Sky. I can't keep calling you servant forever. She thought it might be nice to shake his hand and make a formal occasion out of it. Then another giant truck rumbled through them. The exhaust swirled around their heads. Yuri? Sky? Aju whimpered. Can we please get out of this road? The front door was locked. Yuri didn't have a key. It was in her backpack, which she had left somewhere in Mr. Minochi's cottage. So what do we do now? Yuri ignored Aju's question. She bit her lip and pressed the button on the intercom by the door. Ding dong. She heard footsteps approach from the other side. Someone in slippers was running for the door. Let's step back a little, Yuri said, pulling Sky back with her. Yes? The door opened. It was her mother. There was a video camera on the intercom, but she hadn't bothered looking at it. This hasn't changed, at least. She still thinks my brother might be coming home. Who's there? Still in slippers, her mother walked to the door and leaned out to look down the hall. Who's there? Hiroki? Now she was outside, running down the hallway. That too was the same as always. She'd go all the way down to the elevators to check, hoping that Hiroki had finally come home. Now's our chance, Yuri said, slipping inside the apartment. The door began to close slowly behind her. Sky hurriedly followed her in. Does your mom always run out like that? Yeah. Her eyes were pretty red again, too. Bet she's not sleeping much. Yuri felt pain in her chest, but she gritted her teeth against it. She couldn't cry now. That wasn't why she came back. She hadn't become an all-cast for this. At least you got a lot of rest at the cottage, Aju said, trying to make her feel better. She went inside and peeked into the living room. The television was on, but no one was there. Maybe my double is at school? She decided to check her own room first. Behind her, Sky was looking wide-eyed at everything. Even his pupils seemed bigger than usual. Everything was new to him. Colors, the sounds, the furniture, and above all, the electrical appliances. He shrank away from the TV, cowered by the refrigerator, and jumped when the washing machine clunked as it switched cycles. You'll get used to it in no time, Aju told him. It's not magic, but it's almost as useful. I see, Sky said, his voice a reverent whisper. Yuri knocked on the door to her room. Even though she was still wrapped in her vestments, her knuckles made a satisfying noise. Yes, she heard her own voice say. Door opened. Then, welcome home! Yuri double bowed when she saw her. She didn't seem surprised at all to see Aju and Sky. Maybe she can't even see them. Wait, how can she see me? Maybe because she has magic, she can see through the magic of the vestments? Hi, Yuri replied, feeling like she should say something more to mark the occasion, but unable to think of anything appropriate. Her double was standing by the desk. One of Yuri's textbooks was a page of notes in someone else's handwriting, sat side by side. Are you... Yuri began, then stopped. Am I going to school? Her double shook her head. You didn't want to go back, so neither did I, Master. Master? Oh, right. You can just call me Yuri. Right, Yuri. Where did those notes come from? Kana and Sayuri took them for us. Just hearing her friends' names made Yuri's eyes burn with tears, but she held them back. Right. Kana's my best friend. Sayuri and I are really good friends too. Did you thank them? You didn't want to see them, so we did not meet. Her mother brought the notes home for us. That sounds like something Kiriko would have done, Yuri thought. Her double was right. Okay, just might change my mind in the future and want to meet them. Could you meet them for me? Of course. Suddenly, Yuri felt uneasy. Don't want you getting too close to them, though. They're my friends. Yuri, Hachi cut in. She's your double, a magical puppet. You can't really be friends with another person. Not like you can. Yuri figured he was probably right, but somehow she couldn't make herself feel it. Yuri plucked Aju up in her fingers. Extending her arm, she held him out, away from the folds of her robes. Can you see this? That's a book, transformed by magic. So she can see it. She knows what it really is. How about Sky? Can you see him? Her double smiled. Of course I can see him, Yuri. I am your double. A true duplicate. Till the enchantment on me is broken, I am you. So you don't need to tell me anything you know, because I already know it. That's why nothing surprises her. And Aju was a little wrong. Even though I cannot be friends with another person, I am close to one person. You. Her double reached out a finger and gently rubbed Aju's tiny head. He squeaked just like a mouse. Yuri felt the strength go out of her. Placing Aju on her shoulder, she sat down on the bed. Sky stood at the foot of the bed, his back straight, the perfect model of a servant. So, what happened after I left? It had been 3 days in the real world since Yuriko and her parents had come home from Mr. Minochi's cottage in the mountains. The parents told the police about it. They said they had gone to take a look but hadn't found Hiroki. There were no sign he had been there. Even so, the police had agreed to keep an eye on Mr. Minocci's cottage in the future. Well, I'm grateful for that, I guess. But that will make protecting the magic circle a little harder. As soon as Yuri said it, it struck her as a particular grown-up sort of thing to say. I have changed. Yuriko hadn't been going to school. She studied at home from the notes that her friends had taken for her. Her parents had been talking with the teachers about possibly switching schools, but nothing had been decided yet. Everything is the same at home. I think your mother's a little tired. Still cleans Hiroki's room every day. She cleans it and sits in there for about an hour. She's usually crying, so I go in there sometimes and give her a hug and cry with her. Thank you, Yuri began. Then she laughed. What am I thanking myself? She wondered out loud. That's quite all right, Yuri, her double said with a smile. She's awfully nice for a magical puppet. Yuri was glad. When she thought about it, it made sense that she should get along well with a copy of herself. She wondered if anyone had ever tried it before. Maybe she was the first ever in the world. Well, Yuri said after a while, I suppose I'll be making this room my headquarters from now on. She stood up from the bed, crossed her arms, and looked around. I'm home. I'm finally home. This is my world. You know, I could really use a bath, even a shower. You're not hungry or tired? I got magic for that. I don't have a lot of time, but I really need to clean up. Roger had been keeping quiet while the two talked, but now he piped up. Let's magic you up so you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed first, suggested. Then you can let your double wear the vestments while you take a bath. Sound good? Yeah, but we normally don't take a bath in the morning in my house. Mom will wonder what's up. That's okay. I went to sleep early last night with a headache, her double told her. I didn't take a bath. She'll just think you're making up for that. Great. Could you go talk to Mom for me? Double left the room. Naji scrambled up higher until he was sitting on top of Yuri's head. All right, repeat after me, the lone mouse said in a chipper voice. Yuri began reciting the spell quietly so her mother couldn't hear. The spell to get rid of hunger and weariness was a happy-sounding one, with lots of paws and peas that made her giggle. The double returned. Yuri wedged her chair under the doorknob, just in case anyone tried to open the door, and took off the vestments of protection. She wasn't weak like she had been before. In fact, she felt better than ever, except she stank of sweat and was covered in grime. Even her fingernails had dirt under them. Dirt from the Nameless Land, she thought, and her heart thumped in her chest. She finished taking off the robes, but now she quickly looked around. That's right, I can't see Sky anymore. Sky, where are you? Audrey stuck his head out from beneath the vestments of protection draped over her arm. Standing right by the bed. Quick, cover up your double before someone sees both of you standing here like this. You don't often get headaches. Are you sure you don't have a cold? Her mother said, putting her hand on Yuri's forehead. You don't feel like you have a fever. No, stop. Don't cry. That's everything Yuri could do to keep from bawling on the spot. How could she tell her mother that she was sorry? Why did she have to apologize anyway? Because she was hiding something? Because she wasn't Yuriko anymore? Yui shook her head. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to make you worry. Okay, why did I say that? Now she'll suspect something. What are you talking about? You're a silly girl, Yuriko. Go on. The bath's all hot. I'll bring a change for you, so just jump in. You need it. Mother added, holding her nose and laughing. She pushed Yuri in the direction of the bath. Yuri's mother's hand on her back felt soft and warm. Yuri stood in the bath under the shower and cried. This is it. I'm not crying again after this one time, I swear. Let me cry now and get it out of my system. She sank down in the bath and poured hot water over her head and felt herself relax a little. The door to the bathroom opened. She could see her mother through the fog glass. It's warm today, but you'd better wear a long-sleeved shirt, just in case. "Okay, Mom." Light was streaming in through the window. Still morning. She usually took baths at night, and the bathroom was never this bright. Her mother was a bit of a neat freak, especially when it came to the kitchen and the bathroom, so every surface was sparkling clean. But the apartment was old enough that there were still cracks in between the tub and the wall where a little mold had grown, stubbornly resisting her mother's attempts to flush it out. Yuri traced one crack with her finger and let her hand splash back into the tub. Splash. Seeing the bathroom in the daylight reminded her of something. When was that again? Yuriko had just gotten home and was getting ready to go to a play date at Kana's house, and her brother had come rushing in to take a shower. That's the end of chapter 5. Let me take another sip of my drink. Alright, for whatever reason, when I'm reading, my nose gets stopped up. I don't know why that is, and I hate it. Okay, chapter 6. Digging Deeper. When was that exactly? A month ago? No, it was right after her brother entered 8th grade. Yuri was a new 5th grader. She remembered now why he had come home early from the school that day. Family visits this week. Classes are getting out early. After school clubs were all on break, so her brother was going to go out with some kids from the neighborhood baseball team and practice. Just going to take a quick shower before heading out. The memories came back into sharper focus. Mom was out shopping, leaving Yuri alone at home. The front door had banged open. Her brother bounded into the bathroom before she even had time to say hi. She looked in. Dora had taken off his school jacket and was standing there in his shirt and pants. He quickly closed the changing room door. "Sorry, Yuri. I was sweating like a pig in phys ed. I kinda stink," he told her before she had time to ask why he would take a shower before going out to practice again. Soon she heard the sound of the shower running. It hadn't seemed all that strange at the time. Brother had always been fastidious about cleanliness. Even though they took baths at night, he would sometimes shower before leaving for school. She hadn't paid it that much attention. If she hadn't been taking a bath now during the day like this, she would have forgotten about it entirely. Something about it made her uneasy. Maybe there's more to it than I thought. Yuri sat in the tub, hugging her knees to her chest, thinking. Had he taken more showers during the day after that? Hadn't he come home a few times and run to the shower without even saying hi to their mom? That wasn't like Hiroki. Why didn't I notice it before? The hot water from the shower head beat down on her furrowed brow. And what did the policeman with the eyebrows like a clown say? Ever since Hiroki entered 8th grade, he had been having trouble getting along with his classmates. Now even what her mother had said to the policeman sounded ominous. I don't think he would have told her anything to make her worry. He never said anything about troubles to us. What hadn't he told them? Was he being bullied? Yuriko sat up straight, letting her hands fall down into the tub. The water splashed up into her eyes. It ran down her face and dripped off her chin as she stared at the wall. Bullying? It didn't seem possible. Who would bully Hiroki? Hiroki was tough. There's no better word to describe him. He was good at sports, good in school. He was perfect. Even the most dedicated schoolyard bully would have had trouble finding a weak spot to needle Hiroki about. If anything, he would have been the one doing the bullying, and that was even remotely imaginable. Hiroki Morisaki was the top of the heap, even as a middle school student. He had presence. Yuri sighed. What am I thinking? The hot water must be getting to me. She got out of the tub and twisted the shower knob until the water ran cold, and stuck her head under it to cool off. So what did the policeman mean when he said Hiroki hadn't been getting along with his classmates? If there hadn't been any bullying one way or the other, how is she supposed to interpret that? And the fact remained that her brother had hurt two of his friends. He'd gone out and bought a knife and stabbed them. He was going for the kill. He had succeeded with one of them at least. Those were the facts. There was no getting around them. Yuri chewed her lip. She realized she had been avoiding facing the facts of what had happened for too long. That was a mistake. Yuri returned to the living room, drying her hair with a towel. Her mother was in the kitchen running the juicer. Banana juice, my favorite. I thought you might like some after your bath. Her mother set a large cup on the counter and filled it to the brim. I'm sorry, I just need to pause. The idea of banana juice is weird to me. She always put a little ice cream in her juice, making it thick and sweet. Okay, so it's more like a shake. A banana shake makes more sense. Still, it's weird to me. It was one of Hiroki's favorites, too. Yuri savored the taste. Magically filling your stomach was certainly convenient, but there was nothing like the real thing. Hey, Mom? Mother was still standing by the sink. She looked up from her own smaller cup of juice. Hiroki always liked your banana juice, didn't he? Mother's smile twitched. Her hand gripping the cup shivered. He does. Hope he comes home soon, Yuri said. Her voice suddenly choked. It wasn't an act. She really meant it. Wherever he is, I bet he's missing that. And her Spanish rice, too. Mother closed her mouth and set her cup down next to the sink. Her eyes wandered down to the faucet. She shook her head slightly and looked up. Maybe I'll make some tonight then. Maybe he'll smell and come home. Yuriko, her mother said quietly. Do you think do you think about your brother a lot still? Yuri answered her with a question of her own. Do you? I do. Every day. No, every hour. More like every minute. Me too, she said after a moment. Mother sat down across from her at the table. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. Don't feel like you have to answer it if it's too tough. Okay. Are you angry at your brother? Yuri didn't have to think too long about her response this time. I am, a little. Mother's eyes opened slightly wider. What for, exactly? I'm mad that he left home and hasn't come back. Making us worry, making us cry. That's why I'm angry at him. Other than that, I'm just worried. I worry about him every day. Mother closed her eyes. You aren't angry with Hiroki for what he did to his friends? Yuri stared at her half-drunk glass of juice. No, because I don't know why he did it. I mean, he never even got into fights much before. Her mother nodded silently. I think he did it because he got too wrapped up in his own thoughts. Something was bothering him so much he didn't feel like he had any choice. I mean, of course he should have talked to you or Dad, one of his teachers, before bringing a knife to school. I'm sure there are lots of other things he could have done that would have been much better. I just think he would have realized that himself until he was trapped in some really unusual circumstances. So unusual he couldn't really be himself, you know? Until I know what the circumstances are, I don't feel like I can say he was entirely to blame. Sure, what he did was wrong, but I still want to hear what he has to say about it first. We're his family, after all. At some point, while Yuri was talking, her mother had started to cry. A pain stabbed at Yuri's chest. She had seen her mother cry many times before. She had even cried along with her, but she had done those things as Yuriko Murasaki. This time was different. She was Yuri now. For the first time, she wasn't seeing the woman sitting across from her as Mom. She was seeing a mother who was terribly worried about her son who had done something horrible. It felt very strange. Her mother was right in front of her, in tears, and yet she felt completely calm. She didn't feel like crying. She felt pity, and more than that, felt like she had to help. Like she was the only one could help. A sense of duty. It ran through her veins. Her heart beat with it. It was inside her. Inside Yuri. I'm not myself anymore. I'm an all-caste, on the hunt for the king in yellow. This woman, my mother, no. Her name is Yoshiko Murasaki. Poor troubled Yuriko. Sorry, poor troubled Yoshiko. Hurt. Sad. A little life spinning in the circle. Hear me now, Yoshiko. I will help you. Something swelled up inside Yuri, and her whole body trembled. Don't cry, she heard herself say. You're crying too much, Mom. It's not good for you. Hiroki would worry about you. Across the table from her, Yoshiko covered her face with her hands. Mom, did you know the two boys Sorry. Oh, my brain did not want to read that correctly. Mom, did you know the two boys Hiroki hurt? Yoshiko shook her head, her eyes on the table. I think they were friends of his. For the first time, Yuri realized she didn't even know their names. That is, she was sure no one had told her on purpose. It had probably been for the best when she was Yuriko. She didn't need to know the harsh realities. But Yuri was different. I'm sorry, I don't know, Yoshiko said, rubbing her face with her hands and sniffling. Her eyes were red. Neither of them were in his class until he entered 8th grade. I never met them. So they weren't in a swimming club? I don't think so. No, you're right. They couldn't have been in a swimming club, Yuri agreed. Otherwise, they would have been with him from 1st grade. After-school activities at Kobogaoka Middle School were on a strictly voluntary basis. Hiroki had told her once that many of the students chose not to participate in any clubs at all. Most of them went home right after school was over. You should definitely join a club when you get here, little Yuri. You'll make lots of friends. There's a lot you can't tell about somebody just sitting next to them in class. Hiroki had never complained about anyone in swimming club. If he had, Yuri hadn't heard about it, which brought her back to the main problem here. That Hiroki wouldn't have told any of them if he were having difficulties at school. To the contrary, he would have kept it to himself, tried to solve the problem on his own. That was just the way he was, and that was why so many people liked him. He was popular, which made it even harder to imagine someone picking on him in a serious way. If he really had been backed into a corner, how did it happen? That's the key. What would it take to make Hiroki Murasaki lose his cool, to make him cry, to make him ashamed? What could have upset his groove so much? Certainly not school you're teasing. Maybe he was jealous of someone? Someone was jealous of him. No, he must have been used to that already, being at the top of his class or near it all the time. Would have long ago learned how to brush off that sort of thing. It wasn't anything like that. So what was it? What was it? Yuri's mind raced as she swallowed down the last of the juice. Her teeth clinked on the edge of the glass, snapping her out of her thoughts. With a start, she realized that somewhere along the line, she had started thinking of her mother as Yoshiko and her brother as Hiroki Murasaki, and her father, Shiro Murasaki, Yoshiko's husband. And Hiroko had never confided in them about any problems he was having at school. If he had said anything at all, things would have played out very differently, she was sure. Yuri shook her head and put her empty glass down on the table. She stood. Thanks, Mom. The juice is great. I'm going to go study a bit in my room. Okay, just don't overdo it, Yoshiko said. But she meant, don't worry too much about your brother. Yuri dashed back to her room, shut the door, and locked it behind her. Her double peeked at her out. Sorry. Her double peeked her head out from the vestments. Are you all right? Not, Yuri said, trembling. I think something's wrong with me. How can I think of my own family like that? As if they were just strangers to me. Nothing's wrong with you at all, Aju chirped from the desk, his little pink nose twitching reassuringly. You're going to have to be able to keep a cool head about things from here on out, or you might lose your way. It's a good thing. You'll get used to it, really, her double said gently. And don't worry, Yuriko is still in us, safe. I'll protect her. And when you're done, we'll give her back. Yuri grabbed her double's hand. Look after Mom while I'm gone, okay? I will, I promise. Double offered Yuri the chair and placed the vestments on her. Yuri started when she saw Sky standing at attention by the door. That's still going to take a little getting used to. Aju scurried up her arm to sit on her shoulder. What do we do next? We have to find out who the two boys Hiroki hurt are. We have to find out what happened that day. Are we going to his school? Yuri shook her head. I don't think going there will do much good. The teachers won't tell me anything, that's for sure. Going to the police might be quicker. Audrey squeaked with laughter. You weren't planning on going as yourself, were you? Even the police won't talk to the suspect's sister. I know that, Yuri frowned. Got any ideas? Well, Audrey said, you could transform yourself to look like someone who the police would be more likely to talk to, for starters. So what, a reporter? Yuri dismissed the idea. The reporters who swarmed to their house just after the incident might still be on the case. She didn't even want to think about what would happen, were she to make herself look like one of them, only to run into the real deal at school or the police station. How about someone who would have a reason to talk to the police? Or the teachers, but wouldn't necessarily get there as fast as the reporters did. That's a toughie, Aju grumbled. Let me take a look. The little field mouse's beady red eyes sparkled. His tiny feet beat a quick rhythm on Yuri's shoulder. He stopped. You're talking to the books in the reading room, aren't you? What'd they say? Hang on. I'm asking the sage now. He says he has to talk to the infants. Infants? That's right. He means the youngest books. The ones written during your lifetime. The books in Ichiro Minochi's reading room were all 1,000 or 2,000 years old, reckoned in human years. Of course, the physical books themselves were much newer than that, though they had been carefully copied from much older originals. Compared to them, most modern books were really infants. Some of them had barely even been born, and it turned out her great-uncle had collected some of those too. Minochi did a little light reading on the side. It wasn't totally cut off from the modern world, you know, Aju said. But I didn't hear anything like an infant's voice in the reading room. No, you wouldn't have. The owner kept all the younger books in a different room, and most infants can't talk yet. Besides, they can't even glow properly yet. Aju's red eyes winked again. Oh? Oh, he said, and then a moment later, right, thanks. He looked back up at Yuri. The sage found the perfect book. The book was very new. First printed 5 years ago. There had been an incident much like the one Hiroki was involved in at middle school out in the countryside somewhere. A ninth grader had stabbed a classmate with a knife, seriously injuring him. In this case, the teachers had grabbed him immediately after, and he had a motive. The police found out that the victim had been teasing the suspect about his grades. This author, a lady by the name of Shinako Ito, wrote a book about the boy. See? Maybe you should come here to write about your brother, seeing as how the cases are so similar. We can call ahead and see if she actually did come or not. If it sounds like she didn't, then that's our ticket in. Sky, who had been standing in the corner doing an admirable impression of a statue until now, spoke quietly. An author? Yeah, someone who writes things, Yuri explained. A non-fiction author, according to her profile, Aju added. Sky blanched. A person who writes books? But that is a weaver. That's right. We call them authors here. I guess they're called weavers in the Nameless Land, because they weave stories, Yuri added, even as she remembered something else she had been told. Maybe you think of them as sinners. This one's a non-fiction author's guy. They write up about things that actually happened. They aren't just making things up. I don't think that counts as the sin of storytelling. Oh, I'm doing well. Yeah, my nose gets stopped up every once in a while. But yeah, I'm enjoying this book. I'm really happy with it. Maybe you think of them as sinners. This one's a non-fiction author, Sky. They write up about things that actually happened. They aren't just making things up. I don't think that counts as a sin of storytelling. Sky slowly shook his head. Any tale that's told is a story, Lady Yuri. But she's not making it up, Yuri began, then stopped herself. Hadn't the Archdevout said that history was just another kind of story? Even though it's supposed to be a record of things that actually happened, it was still a story. If you'll allow me, Achu cut in. Not all stories are woven from the imagination. Anything that can be told is a story, the same as any other. And before there was paper and writing, people maintained their records and their stories and their histories by telling them to each other. But when they did invent paper, they wrote all those stories down in books and scrolls, right? Yuri said. As long as someone remembered it. That's true, but they didn't write down every story they heard. Audrey's nose twitched. Yuri smiled. Here I am discussing the history of writing with a mouse. There are lots of stories that continue to be told only by word of mouth. They were never put onto paper, Audrey continued. We call those stories unattached. Yuri raised an eyebrow. But if they weren't written down, wouldn't they disappear eventually? We're talking about a really long time ago, right? Achu poked his cold little nose into Yuri's cheek. That's just it. Once told in the circle, a story doesn't just disappear. Even if no one knows about it, it's still there, flowing this way and that. Unwritten in letters, unimagined in pictures, vanished from memory, but still there. That's why we say they're unattached. They're separate from everything in every place, just sort of drifting in the air. Of course, the unattached stories still end up being pulled back into the great wheels for storage in the Hall of All Books. Then, eventually, the great wheels send them back out again. Funny thing is, some stories might get sent back into the circle 2 or 3 times, and every time they remain unattached. Even if they happen to be in the circle during a time when the methods for recording them are in place. There were just some stories that were difficult to put into letters, Audrey explained. Yuri tapped Audrey's head with her finger. That's all very interesting. Aren't you getting off topic? Let's do some magic or whatever and go talk to the police. Oh, right. Audrey recited the spell, and Yuri repeated the words after him. Sky stood as before, wrapped in his black robes, his pale face drawn. Yuri found this very unsettling. What's he so afraid of? If he is really scared, I wish he would just tell me why. Then I might be able to do something about it. Besides, isn't he supposed to be helping me? When she finished reciting the spell, a bright glow passed from her toes all the way up to her head. There you go. Yuri spread her arms apart. She looked down. She was still herself in the same dusty old vestments of protection. I don't think it worked. You doubt my skill? Look in the mirror. Yuri opened the closet. Oh, that's not looking good. Come on. Get back to normal. Okay, looks like I'm back to normal. Okay. Where was it? Yuri opened the closet door and stood in front of the mirror that hung on the back wall. She was looking at a 30-something woman. No? Oh. I am good? Okay, I don't know. It looks like it froze again, but... Okay, no, never mind. It's moving. Yeah, okay. Yuri opened the closet door and stood in front of the mirror that hung on the back wall. She was looking at a 30-something woman with long hair. She was wearing a light blue jacket, perfect for early summer, and white pants. No jewelry. The woman's hair had been neatly twisted into a single knot on her head. That's how you look to everyone around you. Yuri put her hands on her hips. Impressive. Aju taught her the magic words that would make Yuri uttered the magic word and slipped out of the apartment without Yoshiko noticing. In a corner of the hallway outside her door, she transformed into Shinako Ito and began to walk toward the neighborhood library. She had some research to do before anything else. She was walking down the street, listening to her shoes click on the sidewalk, and she realized she was carrying a large bag over one shoulder. It was heavy, too. She stopped at a light and looked inside to find a notepad, a digital voice recorder, pen, some business cards, a wallet, even a cell phone. Does all this come with the transformation? Sure, no investigative writer worth their salt walks around empty-handed, Audrey squeaked from her pocket. The bag's a copy of the real thing, so even if Shinako herself saw that, she'd think it was hers. Yuriko opened the cell phone. The display showed it was getting a signal. Wait, if I use this, will it charge her account? I wonder. It is magical after all, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. I doubt the phone companies charge for magical phone use. Even still, Yuri made a mental note to avoid using it too much. It felt wrong. It's going through hiccups. Hopefully it's settled now, at least. And it wasn't too hard to follow the story. The library was a familiar place for Yuriko Murasaki. She came here to get books with Kana all the time. Sometimes they would do their homework together in the study section. She went in and passed by the reception counter, so nervous she could barely walk straight. But the librarian at the desk didn't even glance in her direction. That was unusual. Normally, when kids came in to use the librarian would always say hello or good afternoon. Some of the kids wouldn't answer, but Yuriko and Kana had always made a point of saying hello back. I guess because I look like an adult now, they don't bother saying anything. Feeling emboldened, Yuri walked up to the counter and asked where the newspapers were kept. The female librarian politely indicated a corner of the room. Hardly anyone used the library in the middle of the day like this. Even the study room was mostly empty. Yuri picked out one of the newspapers from the rack and sat down to read it. Because the victims were both in middle school, all the newspapers had withheld their names. To Yuri's disappointment, she found that most of the articles about the incident repeated the police's reports almost verbatim, and added little else. She found only one newspaper that had gone any further, and done a full investigative report on Hiroki School. The headline read, Incident at Kibogaoka Middle School. It was the school where Yuriko would be going when she graduated from elementary school. If I graduate. The newspaper had come to the school 3 or 4 times, asking if there had been any bullying involved. Always a hot topic, but the school had denied it every time. None of her teachers received any reports of the kind, the principal was on record as saying. Neither Boy A, Hiroki, or his guardians, Mom and Dad, had ever spoken to anyone at the school about it. The school had maintained a constant line that there was no bullying, but, it turned out, they could offer no proof. They just hadn't heard of any bullying, which is why, after the 3rd or 4th article, the school began backing off from their position. Sitting there in a 30-year-old bodies, Yuri thought she understood. What else could it have been? There must have been bullying. But it just didn't make any sense to Yuriko Murasaki. This wasn't a boy A. This was Hiroki. Good in school, good at sports. Yuriko's perfect brother. The tiny newsprint stung her vision. Yuri pressed the palms of her hands to her eyes. When her hand brushed her cheek, it felt dry. But that's what a 30-year-old skin feels like. Yuri realized that while she transformed, she had access to her new body's knowledge and experiences. But her heart was still her own. She was an all-caste now, not Yuriko. She was no longer a teary-eyed grade schooler, but her heart was young all the same. The newsprint hadn't been stinging her eyes, it was stinging her heart. Whatever the details were, Yuriko's daily life at school hadn't been as spotlessly bright as it might have seemed to his little sister. There had to be some reason why Hiroki allowed himself to be tempted by the King in Yellow. Yuri had been telling herself all along that Hiroki's interest in the king had been a mere curiosity, that, by an evil turn of luck, had run him straight up against the hero and its incredible power. Now she understood that she had been wrong. Casey, don't laugh at the fact that she has 30-year-old skin. As the hero searches for the vessel, so does the vessel call out to the hero, to the King in Yellow. What had Hiroki wanted so badly? What did he wish so much? What did he wish for so much that he could only find in the King in Yellow? "You okay, Yuri?" Aji whispered to her from under her collar. Yuri wrapped her hand gently around his furry body. "I'm okay. What about Sky?" She looked around and saw him standing near the entrance to the study area. He was facing away from her, his head cocked as though he were listening to something. He turned around first this way, then that. He looked very busy. Oh, Yuri realized. He's talking to the books. Aju, are the books here saying something? Aju snorted a little snort. They've been yakking it up since we walked in the place. Maybe you should talk to them for a bit, Yuri. Yuri hastily put away the newspaper. Hiding herself behind a bookcase, she uttered the magic word again. The moment she did so, a tidal wave of voices slammed into her from all sides. All caste! All caste! I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself sooner, Yuri said, raising her voice to push back against the noise. My name's Yuri. Lady Yuri, one voice, that of a female singing book, rang out above the rest. We thank you for visiting us. Please excuse the others. This is the first time anyone with knowledge of the Nameless Land has set foot inside this library, let alone an all-caste. I'm afraid we're all rather excited. Do you know why I'm here? Yes, I do. I am connected to the Nameless Land. I know of the escape. Hiroki came here a lot too. The books might know him. The boy who became the last vessel is my brother. His name is Hiroki Murasaki. If you know anything about him, where he might be, please tell me. I am sorry, Lady Yuri, the female voice said, trembling. There are many of us here. Yes, but most are infants. They do not even know that the hero is free. Even I only know of these things through knowledge gleaned from my elders. Of course, the books in public libraries won't be that old. It's not even Yuri. I keep accidentally saying Yuri. It is you. Oh, sorry. You. Re. I just habitually say Yuri because that's an actual name. Of course, the books in public libraries won't be that old. With the Book of Elem in his hands, your brother had no need for the likes of us. Doubt he visited here at all after its power came into his possession. Before he had the book, well, he would have just been one of the many young boys who came here to read from our pages. You're right. I'm sorry. I hadn't thought enough about it. No, it's not your fault. And there is something I can tell you. The voice paused. 2 months ago, we booked since the presence of the Book of Elem here. in our town. That would have been right around when Hiroki snuck the book out of Ichiro Minochi's cottage. Even the youngest among us can sense it when such a dangerous power is near. The Book of Elem had come close, but never came inside their library. Even still, the books had spent many days trembling in fear that it might. Then, one day, one of us was burned. One of the books burned? There's a fire in the library? Yes, but no mortal flame, the voice said quietly. Mage fire burned that book. A single book on one of the library shelves had caught fire in the middle of the night, charring to a crisp in seconds. When one of the librarians found it in the morning, tried to take the book off the shelf, it crumbled, leaving a pile of ash. No normal fire would have burned a book so completely without catching fire to the whole place, Aju noted. Lady Yuri, said a voice behind her. It was Sky. It had been so quiet she had forgotten he was there. I found the place where the book burned. The stench of sorcery lingers in the air. Yuri let Sky lead her to the spot. The sign at the end of the shelf read, Home and Living. At first glance she could see nothing strange. When she got closer she found the spot. But when she got closer, she found where a part of the shelf had melted, warping from the heat. The ash had left a faint black residue. She touched it. The surface of the shelf felt rough under her fingertip. Let me take a look, Achi squeaked, crawling up to her shoulder and hopping onto the bookshelf. At once, all the books around them screamed. Loud, incredibly loud, a blood-curdling chorus of terror. Yuri staggered away from the shelf. She had just been about to ask a question, and in her surprise she bit her tongue. What is it? What's wrong? Even the female voice that had been talking to her before was shrieking. Yuri felt like her ears would burst. She clapped her hands over them. In a flash, Sky stepped forward, plucked Aju off the shelf, and thrust him into his pocket. His eyes were as wide as hers. Gradually, the screaming faded. The pitch dropped, the sound becoming thinner and more pointed, till it was finally over. Through the ringing in her ears, Yuri was just able to make out the sound of a frightened child whimpering. What was that? Quick as a whip, she turned to Sky. What did you just do? Sky took a step back. His hand tightly clenched around the little mouse in his pocket. Stop grabbing Aju like that. You'll squish him. Let him out. Let him go now. It's okay, Yuri, came Aju's voice, muffled by Sky's black robes. I'm fine, and I'm sorry. Sorry for scaring everyone like that. I wasn't thinking. Sky released his grip on the mouse. Aju scrambled up, poking his nose out from the pocket. What do you mean? It was the female voice that answered. Lady Yuri, the king in yellow has touched that one. He bears the yellow sign. He was in the presence of the hero. So that's what frightened the books? Yes, I'm really sorry. The color had completely drained from Audrey's pointed ears. I knew I had to be careful, I just completely forgot. It's fine if I'm in the vestments or here in Sky's robes. That hadn't been fine when Audrey jumped onto the bookshelf and touched it directly. But why didn't the books in the cottage seem to mind? Because they're a tough crowd. Sages and sorcerers, a lot of them. But the books here, they're more like regular people. They can't take my aura. The King in Yellow's aura, that is. So, what was that about the yellow sign? Sky touched Yuri's sleeve. I will tell you about it later. Please forgive us. Both of us. I should have been more careful, too. He looked so apologetic that Yuri found she couldn't make herself get upset. Swallowing her unease, she looked up. Are you all alright? Yes, the female voice replied, sounding short of breath. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Do you know what the book that burned was? Its title or anything? Books on this row of shelves seem to be organized by category. This particular spot held mostly how-to books and other practical guides. She looked at some of the books near where the burned book had been, with titles like "First Aid Techniques You Should Know" and "Getting Healthy with Vinegar." Ugh, gross. I'm sorry, Lady Yuri, but most of these books do not have names. What do you mean? They all have titles, don't they? Yes, but for the most part, we do not know each other's titles. They have little meaning for us, nor does a book's title have anything to do with its name, the book told her, sounding a bit surprised, as if this were supposed to be common knowledge. Yuri resisted the urge to make a snappy comeback. Okay, well, I guess I'll look it up. Yuri checked the catalog numbers of the books to either side of the gap on the shelf. The one in between would be the missing book. She could search for it on the library computer. Yuri cut across the aisles, heading for one of the booths where computers had been set up for visitors to use. It didn't take long for her to find it. Hidden Dangers or Hidden Rewards, Making the Most of Household Cleaners. That's a funny title, Yuri thought. At least the subject matter's pretty clear. Why would anyone go out of their way to burn up a book like that with magic? I wish we knew, the female voice lamented. Yet I can tell you with absolute certainty that it was the Book of Elim that burned it. I sensed its presence when it happened. Which meant that Hiroki had burned it. Or the King in Yellow acting through him. It was Hiroki, Archie whispered from Sky's pocket. Bet he just wanted to try out his magic. So he had been testing his newfound power, given to him by the Book of Elim? That was certainly possible, but still didn't explain why he had chosen a book about household cleaners. If he wanted to do a test, why didn't he do it on a book at home? Yuriko muttered, clicking on the terminal keys, trying to find out more about the book. She scrolled down to view the rest of the entry. Sky touched Yuri's sleeve. He was gesturing with his eyes toward the booth next to her. A middle-aged man was standing there, frozen, like he was about to sit down. Eyes were wide open, and he was staring at her booth. Oops, I forgot. I'm still invisible. I must have seen the keys typing and the screen scrolling all by themselves. Yuri stood up and stepped slowly away from the booth. The man stared at the computer, frowning. Then gingerly took a step closer and lightly touched the keyboard with one finger. Yikes, that was close. I totally forgot. It's easier than you might think, Aji squeaked merrily. It seemed his mood had recovered from the excitement before. Yuri hid behind a nearby shelf and crossed her arms. I think we found out just about everything we're going to from this place. I'm truly sorry we could not be of more help to you, Outcast, the female voice apologized. That's quite all right, Yuri said, smiling. Still figuring this whole thing out myself. Will you go to the library at the school? She meant the library at Kibogaoka Middle School. You may yet find books there that can aid you in your search. Though I'm afraid many of them are infants yet. They may well know something of your brother, at least the other students. You're right. I'll check it out, thanks. She left the library. Just outside the front lobby there is a public phone which she used to call the police station. Yuri gave her name as Shinako Ito. When there was no reaction, Yuri breathed a sigh of relief. He was half expecting something like, "What, you again? Weren't you just here a week ago?" It looks like my disguise just might work after all. She told the person who answered that she was investigating the murder of the boy at Kibogaoka, and after she had been transferred several times, someone told her to come down to the station. Yuri was increasingly aware that her disguise was more than just that. It was a complete transformation. She never would have been able to talk to people on the phone like this a week ago. It was incredibly convenient, as she needed access to the grown-up world to get things done, but also kind of scary. With all this business of being other people, she was afraid again that she might lose her real self. We can teleport there, Aji suggested. I'll say the spell. Yuri walked over to hide behind some bushes outside the library. Aju slipped out of Sky's pocket and hopped over to Yuri's shoulder. You ready? No, I'm not ready. You have to explain something to me first. What was the book in there talking about when you said that most books don't have names? Aju glanced back at the library, his nose twitching. Well, for one, we books usually don't need to tell each other apart, really. See, there's not that many kinds of stories out there, when you get down to it. Only 10 to be exact. Of course, there are many more times that number of books in the circle. Still, you can trace any of the stories in them back to the 10 basic types we call the originals. Aju stroked his whiskers as he got into telling his story. Now, people give books titles because it's helpful for them to sort books, and they can use the title to talk about what's in them. But all those titles have absolutely nothing to do with the 10 originals. That's why we don't bother keeping track of them. Knowing what original story type a book is fashioned after is enough for us. We can tell that just by looking. Now, Aju mused, it might be a different story if all the books got some kind of official numbers when they first appeared in the world. That's not how the system works. And frankly, we books could care less. It's not like we have to introduce ourselves to each other like people do. We could just float namelessly through the circle and never be the worse for it. And there's another reason why most things don't bother with names. It turned out that most of the books written, collated, and printed by human hands, about 99.9%, had extremely short lives. They did not remain in the circle for long. The great wheel's Vinculpation dragged them back to the nameless land and sent them back out into the circle, where they found a mind or a heart willing to make another book of them. And of those new books, 99.9% wouldn't last long either. And it wasn't just books. Anything that had a story to it was subject to this endless recycling. It occurred to Yuri, then, that people were much the same. They all had names. For 99.9% of them, it wouldn't matter in the long run, because it just don't make any difference, and another would be there to replace them as soon as they left. It was a troubling thought. It has to be wrong, Yuri told herself. Human lives were each valuable, weren't they? Yuri humphed loudly. Loud enough, she hoped, to drive the thought right out of her head. So, if you have a proper name, Aju, that means you're different from the other 99.9% of books. The great wheels wouldn't take him back any time soon. His journey through the circle was intended to be long. That was why he had been given a name. I am pretty old, Aju said with evident pride. Despite being a tiny field mouse, he was clearly capable of strutting. Aju's whiskers stuck straight from the sides of his face. And you're forgetting to tell me something, Yuri said, her voice growing more serious. What's this yellow sign the books were talking about? Aju wrung his little forelimbs together atop Yuri's shoulder. Well, if I were to tell you honestly, which you will, Yuri, I could tell you, but I don't think you'd like it. That is, I don't think you'd like me. The mouse stuck his nose into the fold at her collar, his pride deflating like a leaky balloon. Shivering, he explained. You see, it's a story of my failure. I was too weak to save Hiroki. Too weak to stop them. I couldn't fight the Book of Elam. And I don't mean that I fought him and lost. No, I barely even tried. I was no match for the book. Yuri stood speechless for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Sky walked over to her, his bare feet padding softly on the grass. The Book of Elam is a copy containing a portion of the King in Yellow's hideous strength. Yeah, I know. Master Aju could not sway her brother's heart in the face of such power. That is to say, Master Aju's abilities as a book were impaired by the Book of Elam. Yuri gently picked up Aju in the palm of her hand, placing him back in her chest pocket. I'm sure you did what you could, Aju. Only at the very beginning. It wasn't long before I couldn't do anything at all. It had been like being stuck inside a giant glass box, he told her. He could see everything going on around him, but there was no sound. Nor could his voice reach anyone. He could have made all the noise he wanted to, and still he remained impossibly distant from Hiroki. Kinda chokes me up just thinking about it, Aju sniffled, and began to mutter, sorry, again and again, as he rubbed his forepaws together. Tickled, Yuri burst out laughing. You're too cute, Aju. The guy's expression softened. This entrapment of the book's power is what the books call the yellow sign, he explained. Its effect lasted a long time, and was enough to send younger, innocent books into fits of terror. This is particularly due to the fact that a fragment of King in Yellow's power remains in that mark, and partially because it is believed that, through the yellow sign, the King in Yellow might continue to exert its influence on the book, changing it forever. Yuri put a hand to her mouth and gulped. You mean, Aju might be under the influence of the King in Yellow permanently? Aju jabbed her cheek with his nose. I was not. I'm fine. Totally fine. Absolutely. I'm no copy of the king, and I never will be. If Yuri could have seen him where he was on her shoulder, she was sure she would have caught him baring his teeth. The sage gave me a clean bill of health. He guaranteed it. I talked to him while you were in the Nameless Land, you know, and he said I was fine. If it's good enough for the sage, it's good enough for me, Yuri decided. The sage was probably right. Worrying about it now would only be a waste of time. All right. It's too bad, though. The yellow sign had changed you. Might have given us some clues to help find the King in Yellow, Yuri said, half-jokingly. Did not and would not, Aju shrieked. It didn't change one bit. I swear it. Okay, I'm sorry, Yuri said, more serious this time. Fine. Whatever. Let's get going, Aju grumbled, burying himself in the fold of Yuri's vestments. As luck would have it, Yuriko was already familiar with the local police station. It was right next to a yummy Italian restaurant her family frequented. The walls of the station were a faint, sooty gray, with old-fashioned looking frames around old-fashioned looking windows. Yuri signed in at the reception desk on the first floor, and after announcing the reason for her visit, was made to wait for about 15 minutes. Finally, a female officer in uniform arrived and leaned out over the reception counter. Miss Ito? The officer was about as old as Yuri's mother. He had big cheeks and a soft smile. Hello, I'm Kashimura. I've been in charge of the Murasaki family's affair since last month. I hear you've come to do some research. I'm sorry, but the Murasaki family is refusing all interview requests. Maybe they hadn't gotten the message she left when she called. Actually, Yuri explained, I didn't want to speak to the Murasakis. I'm more interested in hearing how the investigation is coming along. Officer Kashimura blinked her round eyes beneath long brows. I'm afraid that we're not releasing any updates to the press concerning the investigation at this time, as there's nothing new to report. Might I speak with the detective in charge of the case? No. They're all out on duty right now. Still searching for the boy, Hiroki. So it wasn't an investigation. It was a search. Do you have any leads? As I said, we don't have any new information. Officer Kashimura reminded her again that she wasn't to bother the Murasaki family, and then she left. She was pretty cold, Aju complained, when she had left. Did you recognize her, Yuri? I didn't, no. Maybe my double knows her. Though it wasn't very helpful to her now. At least it sounded like they were properly concerned about her family's privacy. It sounded like her double and her parents were living in a relative peace, at least. Maybe it was a little optimistic of me to think I would learn anything by going to the police. Maybe it was a little optimistic of me to think being a reporter or writer would make this any easier. I wonder what the real Shinaka Ito would do in this situation. So what next? Go and viz and sneak in? Maybe we can find something out about the case. It sounded like a good idea at first. But the reality of it was that Yuri had no idea where in the sizable police station something like case records might be located. Next to her, Sky was looking around uneasily. Some help he turned out to be. I guess we'll have to think of another approach, Yuri said. Sky blinked. What is it? Yuri asked, looking into his eyes. For the first time, she noticed that his eyes weren't black like she had thought, but a very dark purple. Dark enough to be easily mistaken for black. It was only when light shone on his face just so that she could tell the difference. He looked bewildered. I'm sorry, my mind was elsewhere. First time seeing a police officer? No, the clothing and uniforms do not surprise me. They're all part of the stories within the circle, and as such are familiar to me. Just so quiet, Sky added in a whisper. Yuri looked around the station. There were people here and there, and the constant hum of conversations and ringing phones wasn't exactly quiet, but it didn't seem particularly busy either. It is like there is nothing wrong, he said. Well, things are different than in the Nameless Land, Aju said. Most people in this region don't know about the King in Yellow, after all. This was true enough, but Yuri didn't think that was what Sky had meant, because she too had noticed something missing. They've all forgotten about Hiroki. It's just business as usual here. Time rolls on whether they find him or not. Why would it be any different, Yuri whispered, when she felt a strange wrenching sensation in her heart. Yuri clasped one hand to her chest. What was that? Felt like her heart had skipped a beat entirely. Is something wrong, Lady Yuri? She was just about to tell him what happened, and her heart skipped a beat again. She caught her breath. That's strange. Walking quickly, Yuri left the police station. The automatic door slid open noisily. She looked out on the street. A man in a suit was walking away from her on the other side of the road. Some office worker on his way back from lunch, she thought. No one else was nearby at all. Yuri uttered the magic word and disappeared. Wait, Yuri, what are you doing? Maybe the transformation is putting some strain on me. Maybe it's the magic making my heart skip. But even now, that she was no longer Shinako Ito, her heartbeat was still ragged, getting harder to breathe. Yuri fell to her knees. She had to stick her hands out onto the ground in front of her to keep from sprawling. Lady Yuri! Sky reached down, put an arm around her waist for support. Aju scampered up to her shoulder. Something was ringing in her head. You could hear her own pulse throbbing in her ears. And something else. Screaming. So many voices, screaming. Screaming at me. That's why my heart's skipping like this. The school. Suddenly, it was as if a light had gone on in her head. School. Hiroki School. I have to go. They're calling me. They're calling. School library. The books are calling to me. All cast. All cast. All cast. Come quickly. Aju, take us to Hiroki School. Now. What? Why now? What's going on? I don't know why. Just hurry. We won't make it in time. Make haste, Master Aju, Sky shouted. Do as Lady Yuri says. Aju hurriedly began reciting the spell. They cut across the sky, and Yuri found herself at Kibogaoka Middle School, standing in the school courtyard. A line of students in gym clothes jogged past them, close enough to brush the hem of her vestments. Yuri's pulse still beat ragged and quick, her head jerked upward, looking for the source of noise. The screaming books. There, that window, on the third floor. The window glimmered in the sunlight. The library. Run! Yuri took off. Sky followed close after her. Their robes fluttered in the wind. Aju clung to Yuri's hair for dear life. He ran inside and up the stairs, taking 3 steps at a time. The closer she got to the library, the louder the screams rang in her ears. The clearer they became. She could make out the words now. All cast, help! Save her! Yuri bounded into the library. No one was sitting at the librarian's desk on the right. He looked around. The library was almost perfectly square room, filled with rows of shelves. There were no steady space with chairs. The stepladder here and there for reaching the higher shelves. The library was empty. It was still the middle of the day, so all the students would be in their classrooms. It was bright in there. The room was at the corner of the building, so two whole walls were filled with large windows, through which the sunlight streamed, making the dust and air sparkle where the rays hit. The books were screaming, "All cast! All cast! You must help her!" A light breeze brushed the side of Yuri's face. There's a window open somewhere. He heard a clunk. Yuri whipped around in the direction of the sound. He was looking at a window, mostly hidden by a large row of shelves. The window was half open, a stepladder positioned beneath it, and a girl in her student uniform was climbing up over the sill. Yuri dashed for the window. She ran to her. He grabbed the girl by the... No, Sky ran with her. He grabbed the girl by the shoulders. Yuri grabbed her around the waist. "What are you doing? Stop!" Yuri shouted, as loud as she could, and pulled back. The girl came tumbling down from the window. The three of them landed on the floor, limbs tangled. Yuri hit the ground hard. Her head smacked against the floor, making sparks fly in her eyes. Huh? She thought dizzily. I guess the vestments of protection don't protect against this sort of thing. Ouch! Yuri rolled to one side, clutching her head in her hands. "Lady Yuri!" Sky shouted from behind her. The thin frame was pinned under the girl. Then the girl pulled herself up to one side, hands on the floor. Eyes looked like they might pop out of her head. Her face was pale, her lips blue. "Who's there?" she stammered. At the sound of her voice, the books fell silent. "Who is it? I know you're there." Did she hear me? The girl stuck her hand out, groping through the air. Fingers came within a few inches of touching Yuri. Sky sat up, helped Yuri to her feet. The girl was kneeling now, waving her arms around her. "Who's there? Someone grabbed me. Who is it?" Of course, she can't see us. She can't even touch us. What do we do? Yuri grabbed Sky's arm. Sky was staring at the girl. She was short and thin. Her close cropped hair stuck up in places, like she had just gotten out of bed. She was wearing a typical white school blouse over the kind of pleated shirt that, her brother often said, had never been fashionable. In other words, she was a typical middle school student, with one exception. She had a large scar over her right eye, zigzagged like a centipede across half her forehead. The swelling was so bad that her right eye could only open halfway. The girl looked frightened. She's scared. But when she spoke, there was an unmistakable sound of hope in her voice. "Murasaki," she said. "Is that you?" Okay, hold on. That's the end of chapter 6. Let me see how long chapter 7 is. We should be able to read chapter 7. So let me take a sip of my drink and we'll keep on reading on. I also want to know what the fuck's going on here. Chapter 7. The Knight and the Princess. The girl stood up and began to shuffle forward, her arms out in front waving. Her left eye was open wide and shining with excitement. "Is that you, Murasaki? Did you come back?" Yuri wasn't the only one taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. Sky, still holding her, was stiff as a board, his shoulders rigid with tension. Confusion filled his dark purple eyes. "You okay, Sky?" She had to whisper to him several times before Sky blinked, finally looked at her, his mouth hanging half open. "Lady Yuri, are you injured?" "No, not at all." They stood. Waving her arms in front of her, the girl walked up to a shelf against the wall, then turned and called out to the empty library. "You are here, Murasaki. You better answer me. I've been so worried," she cried, clearly holding back her tears. calling for my brother. I can't do this by myself. I can't make it. I'm so lonely. There was something in the way she spoke. Maybe it was her complete lack of restraint, or the tone of utter familiarity, that made Yuri realize this girl was in love with Hiroki. She extended her hands and searched through the empty air, fingertips trembling. The girl reaching out for her boyfriend. Do you think she can see properly with that eye? Sky wondered aloud, his voice uneven. He seemed to be in shock. Don't think so, Yuri started to say when the girl stopped, her eyes opened wide. Hey! Aju was sitting curled up in a ball on the carpet floor, a few feet in front of where the girl stood. It must have been thrown from Yuri when she fell and missed his chance, ducked back under the vestments of protection. Tiny field mouse's entire body was quivering as if to say, Now I've done it. Luckily, the girl didn't seem to be afraid of mice. She stood there for a moment, one eyebrow raised, and examined him from a distance. When she knelt down, reached out a hand as though she were going to pick Aju up. Yuri made a split-second decision. She threw off the hood of her vestments of protection and raised her voice. I'm sorry if I startled you. The girl whirled around with the agility of a young deer. Yuri spread her robes apart, allowing the girl to see as much of her as possible. He shook her hair that had been matted down by the hood and faced the girl. It was I who stopped you from jumping out of that window just now. For the first time, a look of fear came over the girl's face. She stepped back without looking, hit her head with a loud crack on the shelf behind her. Aju quickly scampered across the carpet, jumped onto Yuri's pro-offered arm, and then climbed up to sit on her shoulder. The girl followed his movements with her good eye. She was hugging herself with both arms and trembling. Please don't be frightened. I do not intend to harm you, Yuri said, trying to make her voice sound as authoritative as possible. She had decided that this would get through to the girl better than gentleness or empathy. She was right. The girl took a deep breath. Who are you? Yuri raised her chin, straightened her back, and stared directly at the girl before replying. I am a book spirit, she said, consciously trying to mimic how the sage talked. Sky stared at Yuri, dumbfounded, while Aju clung to Yuri's earlobe with both paws. I am a book spirit that resides in this library. You might call me an avatar of the books here. Yuri took a slow step forward. The girl was still glued to the shelf behind her. I have appeared in this form because I learned you thought to throw away your life. I would not have you do that. Yuri brought her feet together and bowed, this time imitating the devout in the Nameless Land. The white mouse on my shoulder is my familiar. But do not worry, I'm not a witch, Yuri explained, surprised at how confident she sounded. He is merely a magical being that does my bidding. It is one of the powers we book spirits possess. The girl's shoulders slumped. She sat down, her back still against the shelves. Her skirt lifted, revealing 2 round kneecaps. Yuri walked over to her and extended a hand. Please stand. Her eyes went to 2 chairs stacked at the end of the shelf behind her. We can sit over there and rest a moment. Yuri tried smiling at the girl. The girl reached out without hesitation and took her hand. Now I've got her, Yuri thought. Even though it was a warm, early summer day, the girl's hand was ice cold. Yuri took her by the arm and led her slowly to the chairs like a medic leading an injured person. He put one of the chairs on the floor and motioned for the girl to sit. The other she placed a short distance away and sat down herself. Guy quietly walked over to stand behind Yuri's chair. How do you feel? Hope I did not frighten you too much. The girl put a hand over her heart, as though checking her pulse. No, I'm fine. I think I'm fine. That is good. Thank you. Now that they were sitting closer, Yuri noticed the girl's fine features. Though the scar above her eyes looked painful, it did little to diminish her beauty. It was strange, like looking at the vandalized statue of an angel. You should not do such things, Yuri began. She was so flushed with the success of her newfound persona that she thought this might be a good time to offer some advice. Your life is precious. There is only one of you in this world, and your life is not yours alone. The girl looked up. How can you say that? My life is my own. Just mine. Nobody cares if I die. The color drained from Yuri's cheek. What? She said without thinking, all pretense of authority lost. But what about your parents? Mom and Dad don't care what happens to me. Dad wouldn't even come to the funeral. Apparently, all was not well at the girl's home. Yuri hurriedly straightened her back again and thought as hard as she could. Okay, what do I say now? Hiroki? She had been calling for him, like a girl calling for her boyfriend, searching for him. Hiroki Morisaki would be sad. The words had a bigger effect than Yuri could have imagined. The girl clutched at her neck of her blouse and slumped over in her chair. Thin shoulders began to shake. And we, book spirits, would be greatly saddened were you to throw away your life, Yuri quickly added. You love us well, and because of that we love you. She was grasping for some kind of hold on the girl. Any hold. If she won't come to her, Yuri might as well go out and get her. You came here to visit us often. The girl nodded. Score, Yuri thought. For a second, she considered whether to add, with Hiroki Morisaki, when the girl saved her the trouble. Morisaki and I came here a lot to talk about books and stuff. We're both on the library committee. Yuri smiled broadly. Yes, I know. Audrey squeaked lightly in her ear. I know, don't get carried away. It turned out to be a well-timed squeak. The girl smiled faintly, looking at the mouse. He's cute. Does he have a name? His name is Aju. May appear to be a little mouse, but in fact, he's quite ancient. No, I'm not, Yuri, Aju objected in his regular voice. He looked at the girl. I'm a book spirit too, actually. And yeah, while we might live a lot longer than humans, I'm not old as my kind goes. I'm just a youngling. Girl's good eye went wide. Even her right eye twitched under the scar. So much for being the wise book spirits. Couldn't keep it to yourself, could you, Aju? Hey, I can't be a mouse all the time. Howdy, little miss, he said to the girl with a wave of his tail and a twitch of his light pink nose. What's your name? No, wait, Yuri realized. Second thought. He is playing along. Good for you, Aju. Michiru Inui, he said immediately. You a classmate of Hiroki's? The girl began to nod happily, then gasped. Mr. Aju, do you know Morisaki? Yeah, and believe me, I'm just as worried about him as you are. Not just me. Yuri here, too. All the book spirits are. Oh, Aju added. And you don't have to call me mister. Just Aju is fine. And my name is Yuri. Yuri bowed again lightly. That is, it is like my name, but to explain it would take too long. Think of it as a nickname. Michiru frowned. Yuri looked at her, worried she said something wrong. I never had a nickname, the girl said, pressing fingers to her mouth. Everyone just calls me Inui. No one even calls me by my first name. Michiru? It is a pretty name, Yuri offered. Yuri understood how lonely it must feel for a young girl not to have a nickname. It also helped explain why Michiru was often in the library alone, like this, while the other students were in class, and why she had tried to commit suicide. Yuri decided to ask all the same. Don't you have class now? You won't get in trouble if someone finds you here in the library? No, I snuck in. I'm still not coming to school. But you knew that, didn't you? Yuri met the girl's gaze and nodded slowly. I've been out since Morisaki's disappeared, Michiru explained, chewing at her lip. But I still want to come to the library sometimes. I have to come sometimes, so I sneak in. The teachers don't mind. They know I'm here. They know? Yes. They said I'd come just to use the library, even if I don't go to class. Of course, she added. I can't stay for very long each time. Don't want to be here during break and have any of the students see me. A look of fear quickly crossed the girl's delicate features. She didn't want anyone to see her. She didn't want to see anyone. Don't worry about that, Yuri said. If anyone should come, I will hide you until they leave. Yuri had barely finished talking when the bell rang to mark the end of the period. Michiru began to shake visibly. How long is the break? 5 minutes? Moments later, they heard the sound of students dashing out of their classrooms. Doors opened and closed. The laughter echoed down the halls. There was a sound of running feet. Yuri quickly stood, walked over to Michiru, and wrapped the vestments of protection around them both. She lifted her index finger to her mouth. You'll be safe here. Close your eyes. Michiru's entire body was tense and she was sweating. She's breathing so fast. She must really be scared. Scared of her classmates. Of everything outside these library walls. Yuri glanced at Sky, who still stood rigidly behind the empty chair. His eyes were fixed on Michiru, as if he were seeing something for the first time in his life and couldn't look away. The bells rang again. Silence returned to the school. Luck would have it, no one had wanted to use the library during this short recess. There, now we can relax a little bit, Yuri said, letting the vestments fall away from her as she returned to the chair. You're shorter than I would have imagined, Michiru said. You look like you're in grade school. Or maybe you just made yourself look like that so you wouldn't frighten me? For a moment, part of Yuri wanted to tell her the truth. I really am a grade school student. I'm Hiroki's little sister. Aji used to call me Little Miss, too. But the thought was gone as quickly as it had come. I like this form, she replied quietly. And I fit well with Aju like this. That's true. Like a little girl with her pet mouse, Michiru said, smiling more broadly than she had before. You know, Michiru said, Murasaki had a younger sister in grade school. We talked about her all the time. Yuriko was her name. My little Yuri, he said. He always called her. Yuri. Kind of like your name. Yuri gritted her teeth. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. Can't imagine how Yuriko feels, Michiru went on, losing a brother like that. And Michiru began to talk more rapidly. It seemed her smile a moment before had upset some delicate balance inside of her. Now the floodgates were open and everything came spilling out. I have to go apologize. It was my fault my fault Murasaki did what he did. It's all my fault. I wanted to go apologize to her, but I couldn't. The sudden outpouring of emotion took Yuri by surprise. She looked around for something to cling to so she wouldn't faint. She could feel the color draining from her face. Then Achu batted at her ear with one paw. His long tail snaked off her shoulder, tickled her neck. Behind her, Sky grabbed her shoulders, propping her up so she wouldn't sway. Yuri looked up at Sky. He was still entranced by Michiru. She could see the girl's white school uniform blouse reflected in his dark eyes. Aju stuck his nose in Yuri's ear and whispered, Stay with us, kid. It tickled so much Yuri almost laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. Across from her, Michiru's face twisted and she began to cry. She held her head in her hands and doubled over so fast she almost fell out of her chair. Yuri stood up, sweeping the vestments behind her, and knelt by her side. Bear a great burden. Is this why you wanted to end your life? Michiru nodded her head up and down, trembling uncontrollably. Yuri gently rubbed her back. Curiously, it felt like she was comforting herself at the same time. The burden is heavy, she repeated. It must be very hard for you. Michiru was sobbing out loud now. Tears she had kept dammed up inside came out in a great torrent. Yuri stood off to one side, watching it flow by. You have to put your burdens down, Michiru. Talk to me. Tell me what it is you're suffering. Why Murasaki did what he did. Yuri shook her head. Enough of this stuffy talk. Look, Michiru, I'm a book spirit. I know a lot of things. but it's hard for me to see what's going on outside, in your world. I can't just walk off by myself and talk to people and look into things. Yuri looked up at the library books lining the shelves. She could feel their silent support. She nodded to them and turned back to the girl. Mitru, please tell me, what happened? If we know that, we books might be able to do something to help you and Murasaki. The girl sat up, hiccuping. Her face was streaked with tears. Her eyes rimmed with red. It made the scar over her right eye look even more painful. Yuri gently brushed away the girl's hair, where it was sticking to her forehead. We books are on your side. We're your friends. Please, you have to trust me. You have to tell me what happened. Tears dripped from Mitru's chin. She pulled a handkerchief out of her shirt pocket and wiped at her face. The handkerchief was wrinkled and already soggy. She'd probably been using it earlier, before Yuri arrived. Murasaki, she began repeating in fits and starts. It seemed painful for her to even breathe. Yuri rubbed her back again. He saved me. Saved you? He told her class it wasn't right to pick on me. He told everybody. Michiru and Hiroki had been in the same classroom in 7th grade. Some of the kids picked on me from the first day I got to school. It wasn't anything too bad. It wasn't until the second quarter that more started doing it, more openly. Probably when we started swimming in the pool for phys ed. Yuri blinked. The other kids in her class were always picking on you. Why? Michiru's left eye opened wide, and she stared back at Yuri. Yuri, don't you notice my face? You mean the scar above your eye? The girl nodded, lightly brushing the scar with one finger. I fell from the second floor veranda of our house when I was 3. Someone had left a gardening hoe out on the lawn. The metal edge of the hoe had cut deep into her face. A little deeper and she would have lost sight in her right eye completely. I had surgery twice. Once right after the incident, and once a year later. They took soft skin from my back and inner thigh, moved it to my face. So I have scars in 3 places now instead of 1. When our class started using the pool, the other girls noticed. That was when the teasing really took off. I'm sure I looked ugly to them. I understand why, even if I don't like to look at myself in the mirror. Some of the kids had already started calling her a monster when the school year began, but only in whispers. When they found out about the other scars, they stopped holding back. Of course, not everyone was that bad. Some people never said anything at all. They didn't protect me either. If they had, they knew they would have gotten picked on themselves. They just pretended not to notice. Yuri screwed her mouth shut, afraid she might scream with rage. She understood how the other kids picked on her. That is, she understood the mechanism by which it had happened. How could kids be so mean? I couldn't understand that. I didn't want to understand that. They were picking on you about the scar on your face, that's all? Yuri said, realizing she was sounding like a detective questioning a witness. Yes? That's the only reason? Michiru flinched away. I don't know. Maybe if I had just been able to laugh it off, they would have stopped. No, this isn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. Yuri gritted her teeth. But who was the ringleader of all this? Who started it? Was it a boy or a girl? In the beginning it was mostly boys, but the girls started after the second quarter. There were 5 or 6 of them. Can you tell me their names? Yuri, Hachu butted in. Maybe you should calm him down a little. How am I supposed to do that? Have you even been listening to what she's been saying? You can't calm down, Aju, Yuri practically shouted. Her hands clenched into fists. I mean, those kids are just plain evil. You can't forgive something like that. Michiru, you have to tell me who they were. Aju, I need a spell. What kind of spell? A spell to send the law of them to the Nameless Land. We'll shave their heads, make them go barefoot, throw some old rags on them. They can push the great wheels of inculpation for the rest of their lives. They're the real sinners here. Midway through her fit, Yuri stood and caught a glimpse of sky in his dark, sad eyes. Oh, sorry. Yuri had forgotten the real deal. Shaven head, barefoot, rag-wearing devout, standing right behind her. He was a sinner. An outcast sinner at that. Stop being foolish, Yuri, Aju said, his voice suddenly sounding much older and wiser than it should have coming from a tiny mouse. You may be an outcast, but you don't have that kind of power. There's no such spell. You can't just grab somebody out of the circle, cast them off into the nameless land. Then who can? Aju paused a moment, his whiskers trembling. God of stories. Well, I guess. You guess? Yuri rolled her eyes. Though seeing Aju being so clueless did take the edge off her temper, she could feel her blood pressure dropping back down to normal. There's a god of stories too? As if gods were stories. Yeah, well, Aju sighed deeply, surprisingly deep for a mouse. It's an enigma, a mystery not for us to unravel. That's what the sage told you? Aju clapped his paws over his nose and squeaked. Yes? Again. I think I understand what the sage was talking about when he said you were still young. Lady Yuri, came Sky's gentle voice from behind her. You're confusing the Lady Michiru. Yuri glanced over at the girl who was sitting there with a look of utter confusion on her face. You're right. I'm sorry. Thanks, she said to Sky. Suddenly, Michiru unfroze and spoke. Yuri, who was that you said thanks to just now? That's right. She can't see him. Oh, no one. I was just talking to myself, Yuri said, attempting to smile. Aju left her shoulder, ran down her arm, and hopped under Michiru's knee. I think I'll hang with Michiru a while. You scare me, Yuri. Little vermin, Yuri thought. She was about to say something, but when she saw how happily Michiru was petting Aju's head, she decided to hold back. So then, this Hiroki Murasaki turned against the kids who were picking on you? Holding Aju in her palm, Michiru nodded. When was that? Around October last year, I think? He stood up in homeroom and just started talking. You said that both of you were in the library committee, right? Then why didn't Murasaki know what was going on sooner? Surprisingly, Michiru smiled at that. Why would someone as popular and busy as Murasaki know someone like me at all? Besides, the kids didn't pick on me out in the open at first. Wasn't Murasaki a class officer too? I remembered hearing Yoshiko and Hiroki talking about something of the sort. When you elected class office, are you going to accept? No. He said he was too busy with clubs for that. He offered to go on the library committee because it seemed like the least amount of work. And you were elected because you liked books? No. The girl committee member was chosen by drawing straws, because no one wanted to do it. Besides, she added in a quiet voice, you really think anyone would have elected me for anything? So, Murasaki joined the committee later? Yes. Yuri thought to herself for a moment. For Michiru, that might not have been an entirely good thing. She was sure some of the girls had been jealous when they heard she'd be on the same committee as Hiroki. It would have only gotten worse as the year went on, until someone started to wonder why that monster, Yuri hadn't even think the word, but that was probably what they had said, got to be alone with him in the library all the time. Yeah, there was definitely some jealousy going on there. So he noticed when the teasing got worse? When he stood up for her, he called them all out in front of the class. Didn't they think it was wrong to pick on her? Weren't they ashamed? Didn't everyone else think they were wrong? When he did that, the kids who'd been pretending not to notice came out of the woodwork and agreed with him. It was easy to say teasing was bad when the great Murasaki was saying it first. The worst teasing stopped for a time. Came to school every day during the third quarter, Michiru said quietly, her eyes narrowing, her thoughts drifting back. Things were good. What did teachers do about all this? Were they also just pretending nothing was wrong until Murasaki stood up? Michiru shook her head vigorously. No, not at all. Mrs. Kanahashi helped me a lot. She would scold the kids teasing me. Akiko Kanahashi was a young teacher, taught English. But Mrs. Kanahashi was new at the school. It was her first time with a class of her own, and Michiru swallowed. Then slowly, she began to explain that the mother of one of the kids who had been teasing her was a real loudmouth in the local PTA. When Miss Kanahashi punished her son, she came screaming to the school and called all the other board members. She hit so hard and so fast, she lied about everything. Somehow she made it seem as though Miss Kanahashi was the one who was wrong all the time. Yuri gritted her teeth. Didn't the principal have anything to say about this? Michiru was quiet. Let me guess. You didn't take Mrs. Kanahashi's side. He didn't take your side. Just apologized on his hands and knees to the kid's parents and pretended nothing was wrong. Michiru slumped down in her chair and said, I guess, in a tiny voice, just as Aju had moments before. What about your parents? The mouse asked, his long whiskers trembling. Weren't they worried? Didn't they notice you were having a hard time? Michiru's color had been improving while she talked, and now she went pale as a sheet. Her lips began to tremble, and her shoulders sank. My mom was there when I fell off the balcony. She had just taken her eyes away for a second. Father blamed my mother for what happened. His parents blamed her as well. Things got bad between our folks. Shortly thereafter, they had gotten a divorce. After that, my mom raised me by herself, worked a full-time job. She was tired all the time, and grumpy. When I started going to school, she started working nights too, and drinking a lot. It sounded to Yuri as though Michiru's mother had been so busy providing for her daughter, she didn't have time to care for her. And her dad? Michiru grimaced like she was being squeezed between two giant hands. Dad can't stand to look at my face. He couldn't stand to see her. He didn't want to see her. I haven't seen him once since the divorce. I know he remarried and had more kids. Michiru's voice cracked, but she didn't cry. But as if the pain was so great, it had seared her heart and dried up all her tears. Her fingers twisted into claws, and Yuri half feared she would start ripping at her own face. My mom blames me. She says she and my dad were in love when they got married. It was my fault that it all fell apart. Whoa, that is not true, Aju squeaked. He ran up Michiru's shoulder and jumped where her hands rested on her face. He beat at her fingers with his long tail till she moved them away from her face. Your mother blames herself, you know, but it's too hard on her. So hard she can't be kind to you. She doesn't really think it's your fault. Michiru scooped Aju up in her hands and snuggled against his fur. Cold thought crept across Yuri's chest. So cold, it felt like her heart had gotten frostbite. Pain stung at her. What happened to Michiru could have happened to anyone. It was an accident. A tragic accident that brought her one unhappiness after another, made her life a living hell. How fragile happiness is, Yuri thought. How easily taken away. We take it for granted when things are good. It was too easy for evil to seep into the cracks, turn a person's heart black. Envy, anger, guilt, regret over that which could never be undone, sadness, grief. By themselves, all of these things were harmless. Everyone had them in varying amounts at one time or another. One could hardly live without these emotions. But once evil got a foothold in a person's heart, everything changed. Evil twisted them, making their internal envy, anger, guilt, regret, sadness, and grief into something external, energy in need of a target. Michiru's face was scarred. Her heart was scarred. Her father had abandoned her, and her mother treated her like a stranger. The teachers at school pretended not to notice. Only one young teacher took her side, but she was powerless to help. She couldn't hope to stand against the legions of evil that bore down Michiru from all sides. Michiru had nowhere to run. She was a princess, trapped in a high tower. The metaphor occurred to Yuri suddenly, but seemed so appropriate. She could see it in Michiru's slender form and lonely eyes. She was a princess taken from her home, driven from her palace, made prisoner of the enemy. And her Hiroki Murasaki wears her knight in shining armor, riding forth to save his princess. A hero. The word came unforbidden from Yuri's mouth. Aju looked up. Murasaki wanted to be your hero, didn't he? Michiru nodded. Yuri noticed Aju's beady black eyes staring at her. His whiskers moved as though he were going to say something, but the mouse was quiet. But the hero and the princess are supposed to live happily ever after, once they've dealt with the enemies. Isn't that how the stories go? Stories. Why did Murasaki do it, and why now? Tears were welling up in Michiru's eyes again. No, those aren't tears. It's blood flowing from the latest, freshest wound in her heart. It's my fault. He tried to save me, just like a real hero. But once he got into 8th grade, they started picking on him. In 8th grade, Hiroki and Michiru had been separated, placed in different classes. They had a new homeroom teacher as well. He took Mrs. Kanahashi away from other classes after what happened with the teasing incident. The charges were completely false, but for a time, things worked out. For Michiru, at least. Her new class was much more laid back. Her new homeroom teacher kept an eye on things to make sure what had happened to Michiru the year before didn't happen again. But things were different for Hiroki. When the kids were teasing me, hardly anybody knew about it, teachers or students. That the students in other classes heard a thing. Everyone had heard about Hiroki Murasaki's heroic stand, and not everybody liked it. Not just students either. Some of the teachers hadn't looked favorably on it either. Murasaki called out the class, called out the other teachers in the school too, for not coming to help Miss Kanahashi. Some of the teachers thought Hiroki had been out of bounds to criticize them. Gradually, opinions shifted against him. Boy thinks he's a hero. You've got to do something about this. It's disruptive to the class. A student should know his place. Of Hiroki's critics, his new 8th grade teacher is one of the worst. Yuri's heart ached so much he trembled with fear that it would burst. She was almost afraid to ask the next question, but she had to. You mean Murasaki's teacher was actually encouraging students to pick on him? Michiru stared back at Yuri through tears but said nothing. And the two boys they stabbed, they were working for this teacher? At last, Michiru nodded once, then twice. It was getting difficult for Yuri to breathe. She paused, trying to calm herself down before speaking again. What was his teacher's name? Mr. Hada. Mr. Hada was an older teacher in his 50s. Sociology teacher, Michiru told her. Yuri felt her throat tighten even more. What happened to Mr. Hada after the incident? What is he doing now? Aju asked. He's on leave, like me. Kibugaoka Middle School had descended into chaos after the incident. Some of the teachers wanted to deal with the matter head on, properly, while others just stalled, trying to make sure the blame didn't fall on them. Early on in the ensuing struggle, Mrs. Kanahashi had been suspended. That, it turned out, had been Mr. Hada's doing. He claimed that the teasing issue Murasaki had been involved in the year before had been handled properly. The principal and the board had gone along. Mrs. Kanahashi was without allies, locked up in a tower of her own. She had clearly drawn the short straw in all of this. Aju, I'd like to amend what I said earlier, Yuri began. I think we should send the principal and Mr. Hada to the Nameless Land first. I already told you we can't do that. The mouse turned to Michiru. Do Hiroki's parents know about all this? Michiru's face darkened. She shook her head. I don't think Murasaki said anything to his parents about what happened last year. It didn't seem like the kind of thing he would go out of his way to say. That made sense enough to Yuri. Hiroki wasn't the type to go home and tell his parents about what he had done that day. He had been standing up for a girl in class. And he didn't tell them about it when he started getting picked on? I don't think so, Aju, Yuri said, before Michiru could answer. It's not the kind of thing you can talk about so easily. Yuri closed her eyes. Finally understood. It made sense. When Hiroki had come home suddenly from school that day, Going to the shower. That's because he had been picked on at school. He was washing mud out of his hair, or dirt off of his face, or blood from a wound. Hiroki Murasaki was a tough kid. It would have taken a lot to get him down. But his situation at the time was anything but normal. Imagine getting picked on by half the class, with your own homeroom teacher as the ringleader, from under the bright shining red of education. Bright shining flag of education. Mr. Hada had called his troops to battle, declared open season on bullying Hiroki. No wonder none of the kids had shown any hesitation. Yuri was sure there had been plenty of willing participants. It was about as evil a situation as she could imagine. Certainly nothing a single middle school student could stand up to. But Hiroki Murasaki hadn't caved. Something wrong was still wrong, no matter how many people were doing it. He didn't bow to the bullies. He knew he had to fight them. That was why he went looking for more power. He was lured by the giant shining coin of the hero, and when he grabbed for it, there on the other side was the dark, bewitching glimmer of the King in Yellow, which is how the Dark King looking for destruction and the young boy looking for power had met. It was anger that led Hiroki to become the last vessel after all. Not blind rage, but justified anger. Righteous anger. Regret and sadness filled Yuri's chest to breaking. Somewhere buried beneath the vestments of the all-caste, Yuriko Murasaki was crying. The two boys Hiroki stabbed were the main conspirators. The leaders, Achu asked, carefully choosing his words. Michiru showed no such hesitation. They were Mr. Hada's flunkies. With their own teacher egging them on, they thought they could do anything, and they were right. Achu clucked his tiny tongue. Their kind always appears at times of war. Yuri raised an eyebrow at Achu. War? That's right, war. This is a war. King in Yellow must have been pleased. The story of the hero was always the story of war. Lady Yuri? Sky called out hesitantly. As usual, Yuri had forgotten he was even there. Might you ask if the Lady Michiru heard anything about the Book of Ilum from your brother? About how he obtained it? How he used it? Perhaps she knows something. Sky was still looking at Michiru as if she were the strangest thing he had ever seen in his life. His eyes were filled with reverence, possibly fear. Or maybe he's just thinking too hard. When he first saw her, Lady Michiru did something that troubled me. She turned to you, and you were invisible at the time. Called out for Murasaki, yes? That's right. Didn't she ask if he had come back? It meant she had a reason to expect Hiroki to return, invisible, to the library. More than expect. She had been waiting for him to come. That was why she had come to the library. Yuri gave Sky a look to tell him that she understood. Then she turned back to Michiru, was wiping at her eyes with a handkerchief that was now so soggy it did her little good at all. Yuri lightly clapped her hands together to get her attention, leaned forward in the chair. Michiru, I need to talk to you about something. Something very important, on which Murasaki's life might depend. Michiru jerked upright, nearly dropping her handkerchief on the floor. That's why, Yuri continued, I need you to try to answer me as honestly as possible. Don't hide anything, all right? Michiru looked at Yuri with her bloodshot left eye and nodded. We book spirits know that he had obtained a very powerful magic book as his ally. Michiru didn't look startled by this. She only nodded lightly. It is called the Book of Ilum. Do you know of it? Murasaki talked about it, yes. But you never saw it. She shook her head. He said it was very important, and besides, he had taken it without permission, so he kept it hidden. When was this? Achu cut in impatiently. Yuri tapped one finger on his head and went on. You like books, don't you, Michiru? Yes. Murasaki also liked books? Well, he didn't not like them, but he wasn't a bookworm like me. Still, I think I got him more interested than he had been. He always liked hearing me tell him about things I'd read. Yuri nodded slowly. All right, Michiru. Now, did Murasaki ever tell you about a cottage in the mountains with a reading room? A place with many old books? A lump formed in Michiru's thin throat. He swallowed. I know about the reading room. He brought us there once. The three of us. The three of you? Yes. Mrs. Kanahashi drove us in her car. It had been right after spring break started. He had gone out for a drive under a blue sky. Perfect drive on a perfect day. Michiru described to her with watery eyes. 8th grade had started. Michiru wasn't getting teased anymore, and the worst of it had yet to start for Hiroki. For the two of them, it was the most peaceful time they had ever had together. Murasaki wasn't the type to be friends with someone like me. Not really, Michiru crossed her eggs and sighed. When we first started out on the library committee together, we hardly spoke. I didn't know what to say to him, and he probably had no idea what to say to me. But after he had declared himself her knight in shining armor, Hiroki's position had changed. Or maybe it was his whole way of thinking. He tried to be my friend, but we didn't have much in common. The only thing we could talk about was books. I think it was hard on him coming up here with anything else at first. Then, one day, he told me about his strange great-uncle. That's when I heard about the cottage. He had told her about the ramshackle place up in the mountains, like a haunted house, filled with rare books from around the world. Michiru had been intrigued. Midway through the third quarter, when the teasing had finally subsided, she had been happy when Hiroki mentioned it again. Told him I'd like to see it someday. Don't know why. Hiroki had invited her to come. I've been wanting to go back myself. He even remembered how to get there. You can't take a train, though. It's way up in the mountains. You need a car. Hey, I got an idea. Let's ask Miss Kanahashi. Miss Kanahashi had been interested too, but being a teacher, she said she needed their parents' permission. Then Murasaki said if they asked their parents, there's no way they would give the okay. The place was inherited. Until final ownership was sorted out, they couldn't just wander in. He said he would have to go in secret. It's okay, Miss Kanahashi. I checked it out when I was there last year. You could easily put your hand through one of the windows and open the lock. It would be in and out, and no one would even know the difference. It's not like we're going to do anything bad. Yuri was surprised. This was a side of Hiroki she had never knew about. Though it was like him to remember details like where windows had been placed, something she never would have noticed. Mrs. Kanahashi didn't get angry? Michiru grinned devilishly then. Her good eye twinkled. She said no way at first, but eventually Murasaki wore her down. So he snuck out for a drive, Yuri muttered. And here I thought he was always too busy with his clubs and baseball. Aju squeaked vigorously at her. She realized that she was saying Michiru. She realized what she was saying. Michiru was giving her a questioning look. Uh-oh. Michiru coughed loudly. So, Michiru, what do you think of that reading room we saw? You know, I've been there myself, Aju hurriedly added. Before I started hanging out with Yuri, I sat there for a good many years gathering dust. That's right, Michiru said, looking at the mouse. You're a book too, aren't you? Ooh, she's going to let it slide. When I first heard about it from Murasaki, I had this image in my mind. But then I saw the real thing. I realized how far off I had been. I'd never seen books so old, and all in one place like that. More than ever here in the school library. Michiru looked off into the distance. The drive was a lot of fun. We listened to music, talked, stopped for lunch, enjoyed the scenery. Michiru lowered her voice and told them about their arrival in the mountains. The old wooden cottage with its faded paint and cracked windows. Let them in as easily as Hiroki had predicted, even if Miss Kanahashi had been sweating bullets the whole time. I remember feeling very cold the closer we got to the reading room. I think maybe it's a little queasy from the drive. Nah, the air in there is stale, Aji said. Michiru didn't respond. Her brows were furrowed with effort as she tripped back through memories of the cottage. I remember Murasaki was all smiles. Miss Kanahashi was nervous enough for all three of us, but he was really excited. He was practically floating. Flashlight in hand, he had urged them on towards the reading room. Miss Kanahashi and Michiru had run to keep up with him. I was scared, Michiru said. An actual shiver ran through her. That reading room. The collective room itself was made of books, and it frightened me. I remember feeling my body grow heavy when I stepped inside, but Michiru hadn't said anything at the time. He hadn't wanted to ruin Hiroki's mood. Miss Kanahashi was sure surprised. She's great in English, of course. She also studied Spanish, but she said she probably couldn't read a single book in the place. Hiroki had gone into the reading room, and lost himself in the books, not even responding when Michiru or Miss Kanahashi tried to talk to him. Michiru found it hard to breathe in there. She had to go outside several times for some fresh air. Miss Kanahashi had joined her, so Hiroki had plenty of time to himself in there. Time enough to grab the Book of Elam and Aju, sneak them out without either of the other two noticing. Lady Yuri, Sky said from behind her, startling her yet again. What? I was wondering if you could ask Lady Michiru something for me. Ask her how your brother was looking at the books that day. Huh? That is, was he merely plucking books off the shelf at random, or did he seem to have a purpose in the search? Michiru sat with her face pale, lost in her memories of the reading room. Yuri glanced sidelong at Aju. Wait, you were there. Can't you answer Sky's question? Aju blanched. Maybe? What do you mean, maybe? See, until Hiroki actually touched my binding, pulled me from the shelf, I was asleep, Aju confessed, his eyes hidden behind his long tail. Books sleep too, you know. When no one is using us or needs us, we kinda doze off. And the sage was asleep too? Well, the sage is a special case, that old geezer. He wasn't asleep like you were then. At least that explains why Aju's been mum about how he met Hiroki until now. He doesn't remember. It also explained why Aju hadn't recognized Michiru. The moment when Hiroki stuck me in his backpack and realized I was leaning right up against the Book of Elam, boy did I scream. It was already too late. Yuri called to Michiru. She looked up. Her lips were white. Did it seem like Murasaki was looking for a particular book in the reading room that day? Michiru thought about it for a moment. Her left eye wandered. At length, she shook her head apologetically. I don't know. I don't remember. It just felt so queasy. I didn't want Murasaki to know. I didn't want Murasaki to know. See? Then Michiru's good eye opened wider. But that reminds me. Murasaki did say something strange when we were planning the trip in the first place. He said that the reading room and all the old books in it seemed like something from another world. He said, I've been having this dream of that place since I went there with my family last year. He said that he had heard someone calling to him from the reading room, calling over and over. Hiroki, Hiroki. Yuri felt an icy chill stop at each nerve along her spine. When they had visited Ichiro Minochi's cottage together as a family in December of the year before, Hiroki had been right in the middle of playing knight in shining armor to Michiru's damsel in distress. He was being a hero, looking for allies, trying to defeat his enemies. And something in the library called to him. Something had called his name. King in Yellow. No, it was the hero itself. Both sides of the coin. That's good enough for you, Sky? Yuri asked out of the corner of her mouth. He did not reply. She looked and saw he was lost again, staring at Michiru's face. Aju lightly whacked Yuri's cheek with his tail. I've got a question for Michiru, too. Yuri nodded. The girl looked up, her face drained of what little strength it had. Michiru, a little bit ago you called out for Hiroki. You were groping for him with your hands. You asked whether he'd come back. What do you mean by that? Michiru's face twisted with pain. He must be exhausted. First an attempted suicide, now this inquisition. Yuri wanted to hear her answer as much as Aju did. He walked over to the girl and put her hand on her back. I'm sorry. I won't ask any more questions after this. I'll take you home, I promise. You could just tell Aju. Michiru grabbed Yuri's arm. She could feel the girl's warmth through the vestments of protection. Yuri put her hand over Michiru's. When we got into 8th grade, and I heard Murasaki had been picked on. Yes? I went to him and apologized. I apologized over and over again. Said they could pick on me again if they wanted to. But just wouldn't come to school. That he shouldn't protect me. I asked him not to. Of course, Roki would never have done anything of the sort. It's okay, just leave it to me. But I think they were getting to him. He looked really tired. He was afraid if things went on like that, it might wear him out completely. I talked to Miss Kanahashi. She said we should go talk to Murasaki's mom. But Hiroki had found out somehow, and insisted Michiru do nothing of the sort. But he told her that if she did, he wouldn't ever speak to her again. Miss Kanahashi tried to convince them that it would be for the best, but Hiroki wouldn't hear of it. It's all right, I can handle this. I know I can. Of course he was confident, Yuri thought to herself. He had the Book of Elam at home, and was already starting to exert its influence over him. Influence that led him to stabbing 2 of his classmates soon after. Yuri stopped her train of thought. That's odd. Why did he use any old knife? Not a knight's sword, a cooking knife. He didn't need the Book of Elam or the King of Neil's power to use that. It was something any kid in the 8th grade could have pulled off. Why would the King in Yellow bother possessing him? It was only to make him stab someone with a cheap old knife. Then again, maybe it did make sense. After all, it was conflict. People injuring other people, drawing blood, taking lives. Maybe that was all you needed for there to be a war. I met Murasaki the morning of the incident. Yuri was so deep in her own thoughts, she almost missed what Michiru had said. Seconds passed before she looked up with a startled expression on her face. You met him? That morning? Yes, I ran into him at Cubby's on the way to school. Murasaki seemed really happy. Get ready for a little surprise today, he had told her. A little surprise, Yuri echoed. Michiru went pale and nodded. I'll fix everything. The teasing will end for good. And you believed him, Maju asked. Michiru shook her head. I was frightened. I guess I frighten easily. I thought something was strange about Murasaki. He seemed so happy. Michiru had followed him into school, pestering him with questions. What do you mean you'll fix everything? What are you going to do? Don't do this alone. Hiroki had laughed. I told you it's fine. Don't worry. I'm sure it'll go great. You're sure? What if it doesn't go great? Michiru had pressed him, but Hiroki just laughed. It will go great. Absolutely. And once it's all done, I'll explain everything to you, Inui. I still didn't believe him. All I knew was that he was going to do something he shouldn't. She had confronted him. You're going to do something bad, aren't you? Something bad? Hiroki had echoed back. Suddenly sounding like a little boy. What do you mean, something bad? Something that would get him in trouble with the teachers. Something that would take him out of school for... Something they would take him out of school for. Maybe even to jail. Of course, she'd been absolutely right. But Hiroki had just smiled at her. If in the unlikely event they do take me away, I'll come back to meet you, Inui. I'll hide so no one knows where I am. I'll come to meet you and explain everything. That just made Michiru even more frightened. But Hiroki was resolute. I promise, he said. You can even choose the place where I'll find you. How about the library, okay? No matter what happens today, I'll come meet you there. Even if you can't see me, you'll know it's me, alright? Which meant the Book of Elam had given him considerable power already. Power far exceeding that of regular humans. Power like Yuri's. And you believed him, Yuri asked? She had, or rather, she had wanted to very badly. That was when she had given up trying to stop him. Which is why he thought we were Hiroki before, by the window. Michiru's eyes were swimming in tears again. I've been waiting since it happened. I knew he'd come back to the library. But he hadn't come back. Hiroki was gone without a trace. No one knew where he was. Now many days had passed since he disappeared, leaving Michiru in this lonely, frightening place. She had come to the library, with hope so many times before, but today she had come in despair. I don't know why I thought this. Just seemed if I had the courage to throw myself from the window, I could go to the place Murasaki had gone. Yuri knew what she had meant. She knew it. She knew it so well it hurt. Thank you for telling me. I know it must have been hard, Yuri said, giving the girl a hug. You should go home and rest. Be good to your body and your heart. Try to get your health back. Yuri stared hard at the girl. I want you to promise me you'll not try to take your life again. Don't even think about it. You'd only make Hiroki very, very sad, alright? Yeah, Aju added. We'll find Hiroki for you, I promise. For all Yuri knew, they were just adding empty promises on top of empty promises, but they seemed to be enough for Michiru. I'll be waiting. You do that, Yuri said, and suddenly felt dizzy. Chill raced through her entire body. All around her, the books were calling to her in hushed voices. Allcast, be careful! It approaches! Yuri tensed. Sky rolled around. Aju jumped on top of her head. What approaches? Some thing that bears the yellow sign. What, me? Aju squeaked at the books. You mean you didn't notice me until now? Yeah, I've got the yellow sign, so what? It's all under control. It's not one of your followers, Allcast, the book said, their voices rising to a scream. It's coming closer. It's coming. You must leave here at once. Leave here? Where to? Sky grabbed Yuri's wrist and began to run, leading her toward the exit. Yuri began to run with him, her arm around Michiru's shoulder, dragging her along. This way, Sky shouted, throwing open the library door. Three ran out into the hallway. Aju clung to strands of Yuri's hair, almost flying after her. Then Yuri came to an abrupt stop. Aju flew over her head, smacking square into Sky's back. What's the big idea? Aju squeaked, as he scrambled to dig into the devout's black robes. Sky stopped too, rooted to the spot by the scene before him. The library was positioned at the westernmost end of the school building. From the library door, you could see straight down the hallway, all the way to where the L-shaped school building's hall turned into a sharp angle. The hallway had been filled with sunlight coming in through the windows when they first arrived. But now, unbelievably, it was dark. No, it was darkening. The ceiling and two walls made a perfectly rectangular space that extended like a tube straight down to the corner, except they couldn't see the corner anymore, because it was obscured by a veil of absolute darkness stretched across the hallway. The veil was coming closer. What was left in the lit hallway was disappearing behind the dark. Sky looked with eyes open wide, transfixed by the darkness. He spread his arms wide for Yuri and Michiru, as if to protect them. Yuri moved Michiru behind her, pushing her gently back toward the library, and she ducked under Sky's arm and stood in front of him. Lady Yuri! It's all right. In the time it took for their brief exchange, the wall of darkness had come closer. It was now only 3 feet away from the tip of Yuri's nose, and there it stopped. Yuri threw back her shoulders, planted her feet firmly beneath her, and lifted her eyes to meet it. And that is where the chapter ends. That is where I'm going to call stream for the night. It looks like we're about halfway through the book now, which is... I'm really interested to see where it goes. But let me find someone to raid real fast. Who is on? Hold on, let me see. Okay, looks like they're still going. So I'm gonna send y'all over to Confetti. They are doing their podcast, Too Many Cooks. And it's always a fun time. And then I will see y'all on was it Friday? Friday, there we go. But yeah, thank y'all for coming out. I appreciate it. Bye.